Welcome to this story. Step into the peaceful world of a falconer, living in harmony with nature. His days unfold with a gentle rhythm, beginning with morning rituals, tending to his hawk, checking the herb garden, and preparing simple meals. As the sun rises, the forest hums with life birds chirp, bees buzz, and the wind stirs the trees. The falconer, in his slow and deliberate pace, moves from task to task, from mending his gear to caring for his animals, always in tune with the world around him. He shares a quiet, almost spiritual bond with his hawk, and together they enjoy moments of flight, training, and rest. As day turns to night, he sits by the fire, sipping tea and reflecting on the world he has shaped through care and attention. The simplicity of his life is marked by presence, and every small action, whether it's feeding the birds or listening to the wind, holds deep meaning. Welcome to this story. The sun had barely started to crest over the horizon when the falconer stepped out of his modest hut, the air crisp and cool with the first breath of morning. His boots sank slightly into the soft earth as he walked toward the small co-op where his hawk rested, its sharp eyes already scanning the world around it, alert and calm as it had always been. The clearing before him, bathed in the soft, early light, felt like an extension of himself, a place where every rustling leaf, every whispered breeze, and the steady rhythm of the earth beneath his feet was familiar. It was a life rooted in simplicity, a life that, while filled with the careful maintenance of his birds and the quiet observation of nature, also carried a profound peace, a kind of contentment that could not be found in grand gestures or noisy accomplishments, but instead in the slow unfolding of each day. The trees, tall and still, were wrapped in the soft embrace of morning fog, their silhouettes softened by the mist that hung in the cool air. He approached the co-op, his movements deliberate, each step a quiet testament to years of routine and patience. The hawk stirred as he reached the gate, its feathers shifting slightly, its head tilting with recognition as it waited for the falconer's familiar gesture. The man opened the gate with practiced ease, and the bird stepped forward, talons finding the glove with a soft click, its weight a welcome but subtle presence on his arm. They were partners, not through words, but through the rhythm of their shared life, a rhythm that had been shaped not by commands, but by mutual respect and time. The falconer smiled softly to himself, watching as the bird adjusted its position, ruffling its feathers in the cool morning air before settling into a more relaxed stance. His hand rested gently on the bird's back, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird waking from the trees. With the hawk secured, the falconer walked toward the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the sky above, where the first light of day began to paint the clouds in hues of gold and pink. He inhaled deeply, savoring the cool, earthy scent of the forest as it began to stir to life, the quiet hum of early morning creatures starting to fill the air. The world was awake, but it moved slowly, as though it too were savoring the peacefulness of the hour. As he walked, he passed the herb garden that he tended with as much care as his hawk, the fragrant plants growing in neat rows, their leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze. The scent of rosemary, thyme, and lavender mixed with the fresh, dewy air, creating a calming fragrance that filled the clearing with an almost tangible sense of peace. He paused for a moment, letting his fingers graze the tops of the plants, feeling the coolness of their leaves and the soft give of their stems. There was something grounding about these small rituals, something deeply satisfying in the act of tending to the living things around him. He continued on, walking the familiar path that led deeper into the forest, the hawk perched comfortably on his arm, its eyes sharp and alert as it surveyed the world around it. The falconer moved with purpose, but there was no hurry in his steps. Time in this place moved differently. It was slower, more deliberate, and he had learned long ago to move with it, to let it guide his actions and shape his day. The forest around him was thick with trees, their trunks gnarled and weathered by years of wind and rain, their branches stretching high above, weaving together to form a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft, dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air was thick with the smell of earth and pine, the scent of old growth and new life mingling in the quiet space. He paused at a small clearing, his eyes scanning the ground for signs of recent movement, his senses alert to the subtle shifts in the environment. The hawk, too, seemed to be paying attention, its feathers ruffling slightly as it shifted on his arm. After a few moments of stillness, the falconer moved on, a sound of his boots crunching softly on the underbrush, the only noise in the otherwise quiet forest. As he walked, his thoughts wandered, drifting from one simple task to the next, feeding the hens, tending to the garden, repairing the leather straps that held his falconry gear together. The life he led was not one of grandeur, but one of quiet satisfaction, of moments spent in connection with the natural world and with the creatures that depended on him. He had no need for the distractions of the outside world, no longing for anything beyond what he already had. His work was his purpose, and it gave him a sense of fulfillment that he had never found elsewhere. The forest, in its stillness, seemed to share this sentiment, the trees standing like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the wind, their leaves rustling in quiet conversation with the earth. Everything here was interconnected, man. Bird, plant, and stone, each part of the whole, each piece working in harmony to create a life that was as rich and full as any life could be. He had learned, over the years, to appreciate the quiet, to find solace in the slow, rhythmic pace of the world around him. The hawk on his arm, now preening its feathers, seemed to understand this as well, its movements deliberate and patient, each stroke of its beak a reflection of the time and attention that had shaped their bond. They were not just man and bird, they were partners in a shared life, a life of routine, care, and presence. As the morning continued to unfold, the falconer felt a deep sense of gratitude for the simplicity of his existence, for the peace that he had found in this small corner of the world. There was no rush, no need for more, only the steady passage of time, marked by the changing light, the shifting seasons, and the quiet companionship of his hawk. The morning sun had climbed higher now, casting its warm, golden light through the trees and filtering down in scattered beams across the forest floor, where patches of moss and fern caught the light, turning them a soft shade of green. The falconer, having finished his morning walk, stood at the edge of the clearing, his gaze fixed on the hawk perched on the wooden post just beyond the garden. It was a familiar sight, this ritual each day beginning in the same way, with a quiet, unspoken understanding between man and bird. The hawk shifted slightly on the post, its sharp eyes scanning the world around it, and the falconer took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. There was something deeply grounding in this moment, a sense of connection that went beyond words, beyond commands. It was the silent bond that had formed between them over countless hours spent together, a bond built not on domination, but on trust, rhythm, and time. He moved forward slowly, his boots crunching softly on the earth as he approached the bird, and the hawk responded in kind, tilting its head slightly as though acknowledging his presence without alarm. The falconer extended his arm, the glove, on his hand waiting, and without hesitation, the hawk stepped forward, talons finding the leather with practiced precision. He guided the bird onto his arm, its weight familiar and comforting, the soft rustling of feathers the only sound breaking, the quiet stillness of the morning. Together, they stood for a moment, the man and the bird, a pair bound by their shared rhythm, by their understanding of one another. The hawk's steady gaze never left the falconer's face, its keen eyes always watching, always aware, but never restless. It was a silent exchange, one that required no words, no commands, just presence, just the quiet understanding that existed between them. As the falconer stood there, with the hawk on his arm, he felt the weight of the bird's trust and the depth of their connection. It was a connection built over time, through repeated acts of care and attention, and it was a bond that transcended the need for spoken commands or gestures. The bird knew its place, knew the falconer's intentions without being told, and the falconer knew the hawk's needs without having to observe every movement. It was a partnership of quiet understanding, a partnership that had been forged through countless hours spent in each other's company, each moment building upon the last, until they had become as much a part of each other's lives as the forest itself. The falconer turned and began to walk slowly toward the trees, his steps unhurried, and the hawk shifted on his arm, adjusting its wings as it settled into its perch. They moved together, a steady, unbroken rhythm, the man's movements deliberate and calm, the bird's body light and poised, its wings flickering slightly in the breeze that stirred the air. The world around them was still, but it was a stillness filled with life birds calling in the distance, insects buzzing in the grass, the faint rustle of leaves as the wind moved through the trees. It was a peace that settled deeply within the falconer, a peace that came not from the absence of movement, but from the harmony of it. They reached the edge of the forest, where the trees grew thicker, their trunks towering overhead, and their branches forming a canopy of leaves that filtered the sunlight into soft, dappled patches on the forest floor. The hawk's sharp eyes scanned the trees, its gaze moving between the branches, as though searching for any sign of movement, and the falconer stopped, allowing the bird to take in the scene before them. It was a shared moment, a pause in the rhythm of their walk, as though both the man and the bird were taking in the beauty of the world around them. After a few moments, the falconer began to move again, walking slowly through the underbrush, and the hawk followed, its sharp eyes always searching, always alert. The forest was quiet now, the birds' calls fading into the distance as the trees grew denser, and the light from the sun filtered through the canopy in golden slivers that danced across the ground. The falconer's thoughts drifted as he walked, his mind moving slowly, taking in the stillness of the forest and the quiet of the morning. There was a sense of purpose in his movements, but it was not the sense of urgency that often came with tasks. It was the purpose of being present, of simply existing in the moment. He and the hawk moved as one, their steps in time, their breath in rhythm. The world around them was a quiet companion, and in that quiet there was a deep, unspoken understanding between man, bird, and the natural world that surrounded them. Time seemed to slow as they walked deeper into the woods, the air growing cooler as the trees thickened, their trunks towering above like silent sentinels. The forest was their domain, a place where both the falconer and the hawk belonged, and as they moved together through the underbrush, it was as though they had become part of the landscape itself, inseparable from the quiet rhythms of the world. Around them, the hawk's wings shifted slightly as it adjusted its position, its talons gripping the glove more firmly, and the falconer smiled softly to himself. There was no rush, no need for words, just the simple, quiet act of walking together, of being in harmony with the world around them. As they continued their walk, the falconer's senses sharpened, and he became aware of the subtle shifts in the environment, the scent of pine in the air, the rustle of a squirrel's tail in the distance, the soft creaking of a branch overhead. These small sounds, these tiny movements, all spoke of life continuing, of the forest waking up from the night and beginning its slow, steady rhythm once more. The hawk, too, seemed to sense the changes, its keen eyes watching the movement of a distant bird, its sharp gaze never missing a beat. The falconer paused once again, allowing the bird to take in the surroundings, its feathers shifting slightly in the breeze as it adjusted itself on his arm. For a moment, they stood together, both man and bird, quietly absorbing the world around them, content in the shared stillness of the forest. There was no need to speak, no need for anything more than this simple moment of shared experience. The bond between them was enough, and in this moment, it was all that was needed. The air had grown noticeably cooler as the day continued to unfold, and the falconer felt a slight chill brush against his skin as he walked toward the clearing, the hawk still perched on his arm, its talons gripping the glove with a comfortable familiarity. The rhythm of their movements was steady, unhurried, and as they approached the wide expanse of the field at the edge of the forest, the falconer could sense the change in the atmosphere. There was something different in the air, something both subtle and powerful, and it was the kind of change that could only mean one thing. The time had come for the first flight of the day. The falconer stopped, his feet brushing lightly over the soft earth, and he glanced toward the horizon, where the sun had risen higher, casting its golden light across the field and turning the grasses into a sea of gentle waves. He could feel the hawk's focus sharpen, its keen eyes scanning the surroundings, and he knew that the bird was ready, just as he was. Slowly, he removed his arm from the bird's perch, extending it outward with a steady motion that signaled the beginning of the flight. The hawk, sensing the moment, shifted its weight slightly, its feathers rustling as it adjusted, its sharp eyes now fixed on the distant horizon. With a quiet, fluid movement, the falconer gave the signal, and the hawk sprang from his arm, its wings unfurling in a burst of powerful motion that sent a rush of wind through the surrounding trees. The bird took flight effortlessly, its body cutting through the air with precision and grace, soaring higher into the sky as it began to circle above the clearing. The falconer stood rooted to the earth, his gaze fixed on the bird as it rose. Higher, the hawk's wings beating rhythmically against the wind. There was a moment of silence, a shared stillness between man and bird, as the falconer allowed the hawk to gain height, to find its own rhythm in the vast expanse of sky. The bird's wings moved with fluid precision, its body adjusting with every shift in the wind, and the falconer marveled at the way the bird seemed to become one with the air itself, its every motion a testament to the bond that had formed between them. It wasn't just training or instinct that guided the bird, it was something deeper, something that existed between them in the unspoken space of trust and understanding. As the hawk continued its flight, the falconer's thoughts wandered, remembering the countless hours spent training the bird, teaching it to navigate the currents of the wind, to read the subtle shifts in the air. It had been a long and patient journey, one that had taken time to build, and he had seen the hawk's growth in every flight, in every successful return to his glove. The bird had become more than just a companion. It had become a part of him, a living extension of the bond they shared. The hawk's flight had become a ritual, a sacred moment that belonged only to them, and the falconer knew that each flight was an affirmation of that connection. The hawk's wings beat steadily, and the falconer felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he watched the bird climb higher, its form a sharp silhouette against the sky. There was no rush, no hurry in the flight, just the steady, measured rhythm of the bird as it circled above, each beat of its wings carrying it further into the boundless sky. For a moment, the falconer allowed himself to forget everything but the bird, the sky, and the world around him. There was a peacefulness in this silence, a peace that came from knowing that they were in this together, that each flight was a testament to their shared journey. He took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs, and as he exhaled, he felt the weight of the day's work settle into place. The first flight was always the most meaningful, the one that reminded him of the bond they had forged, and the quiet joy of knowing that the hawk was not just a trained animal, but a companion, a partner in every sense of the word. He glanced back at the hawk, still soaring high above, and his heart swelled with pride. The bird was returning, its wings gliding effortlessly as it adjusted its course, and as it descended toward him, the falconer extended his arm once more, ready to receive the bird back into his care. The hawk landed softly on his glove, its talons gripping the leather with familiar ease, and for a moment the falconer simply stood there, his hand steady as the bird settled into place. The hawk's chest rose and fell with each steady breath. Its sharp eyes focused on him, and he smiled softly, silently acknowledging the silent communication that passed between them. This was the essence of their bond, a shared rhythm of flight, the unspoken understanding that existed between them. The bird had flown with purpose, with grace, and now it had returned, its task complete. The falconer adjusted his glove, gently patting the hawk's feathers as he whispered a soft word of praise, a simple gesture of appreciation for the bird's skill and trust. With a final flick of its wings, the hawk settled fully into place, its talons finding their hold on the glove, and the falconer walked slowly toward the clearing, the bird now calm and content on his arm. The first flight of the day had come to a close, but there was no sense of finality in it, no sense of rushing to the next task. It was simply another moment in their shared journey, another quiet affirmation of the trust and bond that had grown between them over time. As they walked together, the falconer couldn't help but feel the quiet joy that came from knowing that the hawk would always return to him, always trust him, always be there, ready for the next flight, the next challenge, the next moment of shared purpose. There was no need for words, no need for anything more than this. Just the quiet understanding between man and bird, soaring together, forever bound by the rhythm of the sky. The morning had been long and peaceful, the sun climbing steadily through the sky, its warmth spreading across the clearing where the falconer and his hawk stood in quiet companionship. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the branches above, and the faint scent of pine and earth filled the air, a reminder of the deep, ever-changing forest that surrounded the falconer's home. He felt the familiar weight of his glove as the hawk shifted slightly on his arm, its talons adjusting their grip, and he knew it was time to move. The time had come for the hunt, a ritual as old as the bond between man and bird. The falconer's heart beat steadily in his chest, and he could feel the adrenaline starting to rise, a quiet excitement building within him. He had done this countless times before, but each hunt still held the same thrill, the same sense of purpose. It was a test of skill, of patience, and of trust, and he knew that the hawk was ready. The bird's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, its head tilting slightly as it searched for movement in the underbrush below. The falconer could see the alertness in the hawk's stance, the slight tension in its body as it prepared for the chase. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment, and then with a swift motion, he released the hawk, his arm moving in a fluid arc as the bird took to the air, wings beating strongly against the wind. The hawk soared upward, gaining height quickly, its sharp eyes fixed on the ground below, scanning for any sign of prey. The falconer watched intently as the bird circled above. The hawks formed a dark silhouette against the bright blue sky. The hunt had begun. The falconer remained still, his eyes trained on the hawk as it continued its flight, watching as the bird adjusted its course, diving lower, then rising again with the wind's current. The hawk was methodical in its movements, moving with an instinctive precision that came from years of training, from the silent language they had developed together over time. It was as though they were one entity, each motion in perfect harmony with the other, each action a natural extension of the bond they shared. Time seemed to stretch as the bird circled, its wings moving in a rhythmic beat that matched the falconer's pulse. The forest beneath them was alive with subtle movement, the rustling of leaves, the scurrying of small creatures, and the occasional bird call in the distance. But the falconer's attention never wavered from the hawk, who was now descending rapidly, its wings folded in as it prepared to strike. The moment was near. With a sudden burst of speed, the hawk dropped from the sky, its talons outstretched, and aimed directly at a small movement in the grass below. The falconer's heart raced as he watched, the world seeming to slow as the hawk closed the distance. The bird's wings beat with powerful strokes, cutting through the air. As it adjusted its trajectory, its eyes locked on its target. It was a perfect dive, a flawless execution of the hunt. And then, with a swift and precise movement, the hawk struck. The sound of its talons catching its prey was sharp and immediate, and the falconer felt a surge of triumph, knowing that the hunt had been successful. He watched as the hawk landed gracefully on the ground, its prey firmly gripped in its talons, its wings folding in as it adjusted to the weight of the catch. The bird's chest rose and fell with each steady breath, and the falconer could see the satisfaction in its stance. The chase was over, and the bird had done exactly what it was trained to do. The falconer approached slowly, his footsteps light as he neared the hawk. He spoke softly, his voice a quiet murmur of approval, as he reached out to gently stroke the bird's feathers. The hawk responded with a slight ruffle of its wings, but remained still, the bond between them evident in the trust the bird displayed. The falconer carefully took the prey from the hawk's talons, offering a small piece of meat as a reward for the bird's success. The hawk accepted the offering without hesitation, its sharp beak tearing into the meat as it ate, its eyes still, scanning the surrounding area for any further signs of danger or movement. The falconer stood back, giving the hawk space to feed, his gaze moving across the landscape, taking in the stillness of the forest around them. The hunt was complete, but there was no rush, no need to hurry. They would return to the clearing. When the time was right, their task fulfilled, the day's work done. The sun was higher now, the heat of midday settling over the clearing, and the air felt thick with the scent of earth and greenery. The forest was alive with the sounds of small creatures moving through the underbrush, but the falconer felt at peace in the quiet after the hunt, the satisfaction of a successful chase settling into his bones. He remained beside the hawk, watching. As the bird finished its meal, the two of them in perfect silence, connected not just by the hunt, but by the shared understanding of the ritual, the bond that had been forged through time, patience, and trust. It was a quiet moment of reflection, a brief pause before they would return to their home, ready to face whatever came next. The hawk had proven itself once again, and the falconer felt a deep sense of pride in the bird's skill, in the way it had performed with such precision, such grace. It was a reminder of the deep connection they shared, of the bond that was not just based on training, but on mutual respect and understanding. The falconer felt his heart slow, the adrenaline of the hunt ebbing away, replaced by the calm contentment that came with a successful day's work. The hawk finished its meal and stepped back, its talons gripping the earth as it stood tall, its feathers gleaming in the sunlight. The falconer nodded in approval, a silent acknowledgement of the bird's skill and the bond they had formed. Together, they turned back toward the clearing, the hunt behind them, and the rest of the day ahead, ready to continue the journey they had started together. As the sun began to sink low, casting long, amber shadows across the forest floor, the falconer and his hawk made their way back toward the clearing, the hunt now a distant memory, replaced by the peaceful calm of the evening. The forest around them was changing, the vibrant green of midday slowly giving way to the rich, deep hues of dusk. The light seemed to soften, as if the world itself were settling into a quieter rhythm, preparing for the night. The Falconer's boots crunched softly against the dry earth as he walked, his movements steady and unhurried, and his gaze drifted upward toward the sky, where the last remnants of daylight were beginning to fade. The hawk, now perched contentedly on his arm, shifted slightly, its talons lightly gripping the worn leather of his glove as it adjusted its position, eyes scanning the distance with a practiced calm. It was as if the bird could sense the change. In the air, the transition from the active pace of the day to the slow, contemplative quiet of the evening. The falconer paused for a moment, his breath steady as he looked out over the clearing, taking in the familiar sights, the swaying grasses, the scattered stones, and the small herb garden where the day's heat had caused the lavender and thyme to release their heady fragrance. The soft breeze carried with it the scent of pine and wildflowers, a reminder of the world that surrounded him, a world that was both timeless and ever-changing. He felt at peace in this moment, his body and mind in perfect harmony with the natural world. There was no hurry, no need for anything beyond the simple act of being. The hawk's feathers rustled gently as it turned its head toward the falconer, its eyes meeting his with an unspoken understanding, as though acknowledging the quiet bond that had been formed through years of training, companionship, and shared experience. The falconer smiled faintly, his hand resting gently on the bird's back, feeling the warmth of its body beneath the layers of feathers. It was a quiet moment, one of those rare instances when everything seemed to align perfectly, when time itself seemed to slow just enough to allow for the deep appreciation of the present. The world around him was a tapestry of sound and silence, the distant call of an owl, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind, the occasional chirp of a cricket, hidden somewhere in the underbrush. And in the midst of it all, the falconer felt a sense of belonging, as if he were part of something much larger than himself, something that had existed long before his time and would continue long after he was gone. The hawk, sensing the stillness in the falconer's movements, shifted once again, this time stepping lightly onto the ground at his feet, its sharp talons sinking slightly into the soft earth. The falconer bent down slowly, his movements deliberate and calm, and extended his hand toward the bird. Without hesitation, the hawk stepped up onto his glove once more, its wings brushing softly against his arm as it adjusted its position, settling into the familiar comfort of its perch. The falconer rose to his feet, feeling the weight of the bird's presence on his arm, the silent trust that passed between them with each small movement. Together, they walked back toward the hut, the evening now fully embracing the forest around them, the fading light giving way to the cool shadows of night. The falconer could feel the shift in the air as they moved deeper into the clearing, the temperature dropping slightly as the sun dipped below the horizon. The stars were beginning to appear, scattered across the sky like tiny diamonds, their light twinkling faintly in the growing darkness. He paused for a moment, his gaze lifting to the heavens, taking in the vastness of the sky above, feeling a sense of awe at the enormity of the universe. In that instant, he was reminded of the delicate balance of life, the way everything in the world seemed to fit together in a perfect rhythm, a rhythm that had been playing long before he had ever arrived, and would continue long after he was gone. The hawk blinked up at him, its sharp eyes reflecting the dim light of the stars, and the falconer smiled softly, a quiet recognition passing between them. They continued their walk in companionable silence, the sound of their footsteps, the only noise breaking the stillness of the evening. As they neared the hut, the falconer's thoughts began to shift, moving from the hunt and the thrill of the chase to the simple rituals of evening. He could already smell the wood smoke rising from the hearth, a welcome scent that promised warmth and comfort. The small fire he had started earlier was still burning, its glow casting flickering shadows on the stone walls of the hut. He could hear the soft crackle of the flames as they settled, the crackling sound filling the silence like a familiar lullaby. The hawk's feathers shifted lightly as they passed the threshold, and the falconer entered the hut, closing the door gently behind him. Inside, the warmth of the fire enveloped him, and he felt the tension in his body begin to ease. The world outside seemed so far away now, its sounds muffled by the walls of the hut, and he was content to leave it there, outside where it belonged. He walked over to the small workbench, where he had left the leather strips and tools earlier that day, and began to work in the quiet solitude of the evening. The hawk, content and calm, perched on the nearby wooden beam, watching him with the same steady gaze that had guided their hunt earlier. The falconer took his time, methodically, working on the leather, his hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times before. It was a simple task, but one that brought a sense of satisfaction, the kind that came from knowing that the small, everyday rituals of life were just as important as the larger, more dramatic moments. The fire continued to burn low in the hearth, its light casting warm, golden shadows across the room, and the falconer felt a deep sense of peace settle over him, a peace that could only come from being fully present in the moment, fully immersed in the simple beauty of life as it was. He worked in silence for a while longer, the rhythmic motion of his hands a quiet counterpoint to the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of the hawk's feathers as it shifted on its perch. The evening stretched on, each passing moment a small, deliberate act that filled the space with a quiet sense of purpose. The world outside continued its slow, steady rhythm, but within the walls of the hut, time seemed to slow even further, as if the very air itself had thickened with the quiet hum of contentment. The falconer finished his work at the bench and stood up, stretching his back with a soft sigh. He moved toward the fire, his hands warming themselves in the glow of the embers. The hawk shifted once more, its talons clicking softly on the beam, as it turned its head to follow the falconer's movements. He smiled faintly at the bird, feeling a sense of gratitude for its quiet companionship, for the way it had stood by him through the day's events. The evening was now fully upon them, and the world outside had transformed into a peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind or the distant call of an owl. Inside, the falconer settled into his chair beside the fire, the warmth of the flames wrapping around him like a blanket. He sat in the stillness, allowing himself to drift into the quiet rhythm of the night, content in the knowledge that the day had been well spent, that he had done all that needed to be done, and that now it was time to rest. With the hawk perched quietly nearby, and the fire crackling softly in the hearth, the falconer let his eyes close slowly, the familiar sounds of the night surrounding him, and the peace of the evening settling into his bones. The world outside continued on, but for now, inside the hut, all was calm, all was still, and all was right. The morning dawned pale and quiet, the first light creeping gently across the forest floor, filtering through the trees in soft, golden beams that stretched across the earth like fingers of light. The falconer, already awake, sat at the edge of his cot, staring out through the open window, watching as the world outside slowly came to life. The air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of dew-covered grass and the earthy smell of the woods, untouched by the heat of midday. In the distance, a crow called once, its voice breaking the silence, and the wind rustled through the treetops, carrying with it the first whispers of the day. The falconer stretched slowly, feeling the stiffness in his limbs as his body adjusted to the waking world. The hawk, nestled on its perch in the corner of the room, stirred lightly at the movement, blinking its sharp eyes and turning its head to watch the falconer. There was no need for words between them. The simple act of their shared routine was enough. They understood each other in the silence that filled the room, an unspoken language that had grown over years of companionship. The falconer rose too, his feet, the coolness of the floor beneath him, sending a shiver through his spine as he crossed to the hearth. The fire from the night before had long since died, leaving only the faint remnants of glowing embers. He reached down to stir the coals, coaxing a flame to life with a few swift motions, the crackling sound of the fire filling the room as it came to life again. The heat began to rise, and the falconer felt the warmth spread through the room, bringing with it a sense of comfort and familiarity. He moved to the small table by the window, where a small pot of dried herbs sat waiting, its contents untouched from the night before. He carefully measured out a small amount of the herbs, the scent of lavender and thyme mixing in the air as he ground them together with the mortar and pestle. The action was deliberate and slow, a small act of mindfulness that allowed him to center himself before the day truly began. Outside, the forest remained still, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the day to fully awaken. The falconer finished his task and set the pot aside, the ritual complete. He turned back to the hawk, which had shifted slightly on its perch, its feathers ruffling in the quiet morning air. The bird's eyes locked onto his, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. The falconer moved toward the door, opening it gently and stepping outside. The coolness of the morning air greeted him as he took a deep breath, the scent of the earth and the trees filling his lungs. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the world around him. The faint hum of the bees in the nearby garden, the rustle of leaves as the wind stirred them, and the distant call of a bird, all these sounds blended together in a soothing melody, a reminder that the world was always in motion, even when it appeared still. The hawk, sensing the falconer's movements, took flight from its perch, soaring into the air with a grace that could only be described as effortless. The falconer watched it for a moment, his heart lifting with pride at the bird's strength and beauty, before turning his attention to the tasks of the day. The garden needed tending, the co-op needed cleaning, and the firewood needed to be restocked for the evening's fire. It was a simple routine, one that had been repeated countless times over the years, yet each time felt like a new experience. He moved toward the garden, his boots crunching against the gravel path as he passed the rows of herbs and vegetables that grew in the small patch of earth. The sunlight filtered through the trees above, casting dappled shadows on the ground, and the falconer paused for a moment, taking in the sight. The garden was thriving, the plants strong and healthy, their leaves rich and green in the early light. He bent down to tend to the thyme, carefully plucking the leaves from the stems and setting them aside for drying. The quiet work allowed his mind to wander, and as he worked, memories of past days began to surface. Fleeting images of time spent in this very spot, tending to these same plants, watching the seasons change in slow, deliberate patterns. There was something comforting in the consistency of it all, in the rhythm of the earth beneath his feet and the sky above him. He moved through the tasks with practiced ease, the world around him shifting imperceptibly as the sun rose higher in the sky. The birds continued their calls, the wind picked up slightly, and the soft hum of the forest grew louder as the day unfolded. By the time he finished in the garden, the sun had risen fully, casting its warm light across the clearing. The falconer made his way to the coop, where the hawk was perched quietly, watching him with unblinking eyes. He checked the bird's feathers, brushing them gently with his hand, and felt a deep sense of contentment settle within him. The hawk was healthy, its strength and beauty intact, and there was a sense of satisfaction in knowing that he had done everything necessary to care for it. He moved on to the next task, carrying the basket of herbs back toward the hut and setting it down on the table. There was something deeply satisfying about the simplicity of the work, the way each task flowed into the next, creating a rhythm that matched the steady pace of the day. The falconer paused for a moment, glancing out the window toward the forest, where the trees stood tall and silent, their branches reaching toward the sky. He felt a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet understanding that life, in all its complexity, was built upon the small, simple moments that filled the day. And in those moments, there was a kind of beauty that could only be found in the stillness, in the quiet of the world as it turned beneath him. As the day continued to unfold, the falconer moved with the same calm deliberation, tending to his tasks, caring for his bird, and embracing the steady rhythm of the natural world around him. The forest, the garden, the hawk, each element was a part of something larger, something timeless, and as the falconer moved through his day, he felt a deep connection to it all, as if he were a small thread woven into the fabric of the earth itself. The weight of silence was not a burden, but a blessing, a reminder that in the absence of noise, there was room for reflection, for peace, for understanding. And so, with each passing hour, the falconer moved through his life, living not for the future, but for the present, knowing that the quiet, steady work he did each day was its own kind of fulfillment. And as the day drew to a close, and the first hints of evening began to settle over the land, he stood for a moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life lived in harmony with the world around him. The evening came in slowly, creeping across the horizon like a blanket of soft velvet, stretching its long arms across the clearing as the last traces of sunlight slowly faded. The falconer stood at the threshold of the hut, gazing out into this growing twilight, the colors of the sky deepening into rich purples and golds that bled into the shadows beneath the trees. The air, once warm and still, began to cool, and a light breeze stirred the leaves, sending ripples through the tall grasses that lined the garden. The world felt hushed, as though it too were pausing to catch its breath before the night truly took hold. He took a slow, deliberate step outside, his boots making a soft crunch against the earth as he moved toward the coop. The hawk, sensing his presence, shifted slightly on its perch, its sharp eyes locking onto the falconer. There was an understanding between them, a quiet bond that needed no words, only the rhythm of their shared movements. The falconer paused beside the bird, extending his gloved arm slowly. The hawk, without hesitation, hopped down from its perch and landed gracefully onto the glove, its talons sinking into the leather with a soft click. The falconer could feel the familiar weight of the bird as it settled, its wings folding neatly against its body, and for a moment he stood still, allowing the hawk to adjust. They were a familiar pair, one in which silence was as much a part of their relationship as any spoken word. The falconer turned, walking with the bird perched steadily on his arm, and made his way toward the edge of the clearing, where the tall trees of the forest began to close in, their branches heavy with the coming dusk. The shadows stretched longer now, and the falconer could hear the faint sounds of the forest as it settled into night, an owl's distant hoot, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the soft chirp of crickets beginning their evening song. The world seemed to breathe deeper now, slower, as the pace of the day gave way to the stillness of the evening. He moved further into the woods, the path beneath his feet soft with pine needles and moss. The hawk remained perfectly still on his arm, its head turning slightly as it observed the world around them, its sharp eyes catching every movement, every subtle shift in the air. The falconer, too, was listening, his senses attuned to the sounds of the forest, the faint rustle of leaves in the wind, the quiet creak of branches shifting in the cooling air. There was a subtle challenge in this quiet walk, an unspoken test of patience and awareness. It was not about speed or force, but about presence, about staying in tune with the rhythm of the natural world, understanding its pulse and moving in harmony with it. The falconer had always felt a deep connection to this rhythm, a quiet strength that came not from exertion, but from observation and care. He stopped at a large, flat stone near the base of an oak tree, setting the hawk down gently onto its surface. The bird adjusted its wings, its talons scratching lightly against the stone as it found its balance. The falconer stood a few steps away, watching the bird with quiet attention, waiting for the moment when it would take flight. There was no rush. There never was. It would come when it was ready, when the bird sensed the shift in the air that signaled the time to rise. He took a slow breath, inhaling the cool, earthy scent of the forest. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, the cooling evening wrapping itself around him like a blanket. The hawk stood perfectly still, its eyes scanning the surroundings, waiting for some cue, some sign that would tell it to move. The falconer did not make any sudden movements. He remained calm, his breathing steady, allowing the silence to fill the space between them. It was a quiet challenge, one in which neither of them needed to speak, but both had to carefully listen to the subtle signs of the world around them, the movement of the air, the shifting of the ground beneath their feet. And then, without warning, the hawk spread its wings, lifting itself from the stone in one smooth motion. The falconer felt the air stir around him as the bird took flight, its wings slicing through the evening air with a grace that seemed almost effortless. He followed its movement with his eyes, watching as the hawk climbed higher, the light from the setting sun glinting off its feathers as it soared into the sky. The falconer stood still, his heart beating in rhythm with the bird's wings. There was something profoundly satisfying in this moment, the silent challenge of the forest, the quiet connection between them, and the understanding that, no matter how much time had passed, this bond would always be there. The hawk circled above, its wings beating steadily as it gained altitude, and the falconer remained grounded, waiting. He did not call out to it, did not make any sound. He simply stood there, feeling the steady pulse of the earth beneath him, watching the bird climb higher into the sky. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of the forest and the soft whisper of leaves shifting in the breeze. The hawk began to dive, its wings folding tightly as it descended with a precision that could only come from years of practice, of shared trust and understanding. The falconer's eyes remained locked onto the bird, watching its every move, every subtle shift in its flight pattern. The hawk was not just hunting. It was testing itself, pushing its boundaries in this quiet dance of skill and precision. The falconer knew this, understood it, and did not need to intervene. This was their time spent in perfect harmony, not in the rush of a world that constantly demanded more, but in the gentle challenge of a moment fully lived. The hawk landed on a nearby branch, its wings folding neatly against its body. As it settled into the tree, its head turning slightly to look back at the falconer, the bird's sharp eyes caught his gaze, and for a moment there was nothing but the stillness between them. No need for words, no need for commands, just the quiet understanding of two beings, perfectly attuned to each other and the world around them. The falconer took a step closer, his movements slow and deliberate, his heart still steady from the quiet challenge of the moment. He reached out his arm, the glove ready, and the hawk shifted on its perch, preparing to take flight once again. As the bird launched itself from the branch, the falconer felt the weight of its talons settle into the glove, a familiar presence that grounded him in the moment. Together, they moved back toward the hut, the silence between them a shared understanding of the day's challenge, a reminder that sometimes the quietest moments held the greatest power. The sun had long since disappeared behind the trees, and the world around them had shifted into the cool quiet of evening. But for the falconer and the hawk, the day had not ended. It had simply paused, waiting for the next challenge, the next movement, the next moment to be lived fully and in silence. The falconer stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the twilight descend over the land with the kind of reverence only someone truly in tune with nature could understand. The last light of the day stretched across the landscape like a golden ribbon, winding through the trees, turning the world into a soft, glowing painting that whispered of endings and beginnings. The evening had come not with the loud crescendo of bustling life, but with a quiet unfolding, a slow, rhythmic transition that mirrored the pulse of the forest itself. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs, savoring the scent of damp earth and pine needles that was always most pronounced in the quiet moments between day and night. The hawk, now perched quietly on its stand beside the hut, blinked slowly, its sharp eyes scanning the horizon as though taking stock of the world around it. The falconer turned his gaze toward the bird, his heart swelling with the familiarity of their silent bond. There were no words between them, no commands given, just the understanding that came from years of companionship. They shared a rhythm that transcended speech, an unspoken language of movement and trust. He felt it in the way his pulse quickened when the bird took flight, in the way the hawk's wings cut through the air with purpose and precision. He felt it now, as he stood quietly in the fading light, watching the bird and listening to the world around them. The breeze picked up, sending a ripple through the long grasses at the edge of the clearing. The falconer's cloak fluttered gently. Behind him, the sound of the fabric brushing against the air, a soft accompaniment to the growing quiet of the evening. He stepped forward, the ground beneath his boots soft with the recent rain, and made his way toward the hawk, who had not moved from its perch. The bird blinked at him, its sharp eyes flicking from his face to the sky, as though gauging his next move. He reached out slowly, offering his gloved hand to the bird. There was no need to rush, no need to call it down. The hawk, in its own time, stepped forward, its talons settling on the leather with practiced ease. The falconer's arm remained steady, the weight of the bird a familiar presence, grounding him in the moment. Together, they moved toward the forest's edge, where the trees stood tall and silent, their trunks darkened by the deepening shadows. The air was growing cooler now, the light from the dying sun filtering through the canopy above, casting dappled patterns across the ground. The falconer's steps slowed, his mind drifting with the rhythm of the world around him. There was peace here, a stillness that was hard to find anywhere else. The forest held a quiet kind of power, one that had nothing to do with force or strength, but everything to do with patience and time. He stopped at a small clearing, a familiar spot, where the ground was covered in soft moss, and the air smelled of rich, wet earth. It was a place where he had often come to reflect, to let the silence envelop him like a blanket. He felt the hawk shift on his arm, its talons curling slightly as the bird adjusted its position. The falconer smiled softly, his gaze lifting too. The sky, as the last traces of light faded into the horizon. The stars were beginning to appear now, scattered across the sky like tiny pinpricks of light. The night had come, and with it, a quiet promise that the world would continue to turn, regardless of what happened within it. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the night wash over him. The sound of the wind in the trees was soothing, like a soft lullaby sung by the earth itself. He could hear the distant call of an owl, the rhythmic croak of frogs near the stream, the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush. It was a symphony of quiet sounds, each one playing its part in the grand melody of the night. When he opened his eyes again, the sky was fully dark, the stars now shining brightly above, their light clear and unclouded by the haze of the day. The falconer took a slow breath, feeling the coolness of the night air against his skin. The hawk, now fully settled on his arm, seemed to be in tune with the night as well, its eyes scanning the darkness, its body still and poised, ready for whatever might come next. It was a moment of perfect stillness, a shared understanding between man and bird that needed no words. As the night deepened, the falconer stood in the clearing, his hand resting lightly on the bird's back, feeling the steady beat of its heart beneath the leather of his glove. They were two creatures, alone, in the vastness of the world, yet perfectly content in the quiet company of one another. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the stillness of the night, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stretch, to slow, as if the world had paused just for them. The hawk shifted slightly, its wings twitching as it prepared to move, but the falconer held it steady, his arm a silent anchor in the night. He looked out over the clearing once more, his eyes tracing the outline of the trees in the dim light. There was something profoundly calming about this place, something that spoke to the deepest parts of him. It was a place where time did not matter, where the world outside could not reach, where everything that was needed could be found within the silence. The falconer closed his eyes again, letting the cool night air fill his lungs, and he allowed himself to simply be. There was no rush, no agenda, no demands, only the quiet rhythm of his own breath, the steady beat of the hawk's heart, and the distant murmur of the forest surrounding him. The world outside could wait. In this moment, all was as it should be. The falconer had learned long ago that there was wisdom in stillness, that sometimes the greatest moments of clarity came not from action, but from observation. And so he stood there, waiting, not for anything in particular, but for whatever the night might bring. There was a kind of beauty in that knowing that the world would continue to turn, that the hawk would soar again, and that, in the quiet spaces between, he could find the peace he had long sought. He turned slowly, guiding the hawk back toward the hut, where the flickering light from the hearth waited to greet them. The fire was still burning low, its warm glow spilling out the door as they approached. The falconer stepped inside, the hawk following silently on his arm, and he closed the door behind them, shutting out the cool night air. The room was warm and inviting, the scent of burning wood and herbs filling the space, and he moved toward the hearth, setting the hawk down gently on its perch beside the fire. As the bird settled into the warmth, the falconer took a moment to remove his gloves, his hands still warm from the hawk's body. He reached for the kettle, filling it with water to brew a cup of tea, and settled into the chair beside the fire. The world outside could wait. The night was still young, and there was peace to be found in the quiet company of the hearth, the bird, and the deep, unspoken bond between them. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light spilling over the clearing, casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly across the land. The falconer, now alone in the quiet of his hut, leaned against the doorway, his gaze fixed on the world outside, where the night had settled deeply into the earth. The hawk, perched silently beside the hearth, seemed to share the same quiet reverence for the night. The flickering fire cast a soft, amber glow across the walls, and the subtle crackling of the wood added to the calmness that had taken over the entire space. It was a peace that was palpable, a silence that was not empty, but filled with the weight of the forest's presence. The falconer's thoughts drifted, not in any particular direction, but simply floating in the vast stillness that the night had brought. He could hear the faint rustle of the trees outside, their leaves stirring gently in the breeze, the distant call of an owl echoing through the darkened woods. Every sound seemed to blend into one, creating a symphony of tranquility that wrapped itself around him like a blanket. He let out a long breath, releasing the tension that had built up throughout the day. It was moments like these that reminded him of the simplicity of life, the beauty that could be found in stillness, in waiting, in watching. His eyes wandered over the familiar sights of his small home, the worn wood of the walls, the soft glow of the fire, the quiet bird beside him. Each item in the room seemed to hold its own story, its own place in the tapestry of his life. Hawk, with its steady gaze and silent presence, was a constant in his world, a reminder of the bond they shared, forged through countless hours of training, patience, and trust. He reached over to adjust the bird's perch slightly, his fingers brushing against the soft feathers of its back. The hawk blinked at him, its sharp eyes catching the light of the fire before it lowered its head once more, settling into the stillness of the room. The falconer smiled softly, the bond between them unspoken but understood in every movement, in every shared silence. Outside, the stars had begun to reveal themselves in greater detail, their faint light twinkling through the branches of the trees. The sky had deepened to a rich shade of indigo, with only the softest traces of twilight lingering at the horizon. It was in moments like this, when the world seemed to hold its breath, that he felt most alive, most connected to the rhythm of the earth. It was a feeling he could never quite put into words, a deep sense of belonging that came from being in tune with nature, from understanding the unspoken language of the wind, the trees, the birds. He turned away from the doorway and walked over to the small window, pushing aside the heavy curtain that shielded the hut from the night's chill. The cool air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine. He inhaled deeply, savoring the freshness that seemed to fill his lungs, grounding him further into the present. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the night wash over him. The sound of the forest was louder now, more pronounced as the animals of the night began to stir. The distant rustling of leaves, the soft croak of a frog, the faint rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush, all of it seemed to blend together in a natural rhythm. It was both calming and invigorating. He could hear the sound of the creek flowing somewhere in the distance, its steady gurgle, a constant presence in the background of the forest song. There was something about the night, something in its stillness, that made everything seem more vivid, more alive. The falconer turned back toward the hearth, the warmth of the fire drawing him in. He moved slowly, deliberately, taking his time as he walked across the room. The hawk remained still on its perch, its eyes following his movements with quiet curiosity. He crouched down beside the bird, his gloved hand resting lightly on the smooth wood of the perch, and he allowed himself a moment of stillness, of connection. In the silence, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the soft rustling of the leaves outside. He reached out to touch the bird gently, his fingers grazing the feathers along its chest. The hawk blinked at him, its eyes locking with his for a moment before it resumed its steady watch over the room. It was as though the world outside had ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them in the quiet embrace of the night. The falconer stood up slowly, his movements measured and calm. He moved back to the hearth, adding another log to the fire, watching as the flames licked upward, consuming the dry wood with a soft hiss. The room was growing warmer now, the heat from the fire filling the space and mingling with the coolness of the night air that still drifted in through the window. He settled into his chair beside the hearth, his gaze returning to the bird. The hawk shifted slightly, its talons clicking against the wood as it adjusted its position. The falconer smiled, his heart swelling with the quiet joy that came from knowing he was exactly where he needed to be. As the fire burned low and the night deepened around them, he felt the weight of the day begin to slip away. There was no rush, no urgency, only the peaceful rhythm of the fire's crackling, the steady breath of the bird beside him, and the quiet hum of the forest beyond. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to drift in the stillness, knowing that tomorrow would come with its own rhythm, its own challenges. But for now, the world outside could wait. The night had come to claim the world once more, and he was content to be a quiet observer, a participant in the slow, endless dance of life and time. He let the silence fill him, letting it settle deep within his bones until all that remained was the present, the flickering fire, and the steady heartbeat of the hawk. Soft pinks and purples of the horizon. The warmth of the fire had long since faded, leaving only the lingering scent of wood smoke that clung to the air like an old memory. The hawk, perched beside the hearth, had stirred slightly, sensing the change in the air as dawn approached. Its sharp eyes were fixed on the falconer, who, despite the quiet peace of the morning, could feel the weight of the day ahead settling in his chest. Today would be different. He could feel it in the subtle shift of the air, in the way the sun was just beginning to stretch its fingers across the sky. There was a quiet anticipation that hung in the air, something unspoken but undeniably present. The falconer rose from the cot with a practiced slowness, stretching his limbs as the muscles in his back and shoulders gave a soft protest to the sudden movement. He ran a hand through his hair, pushing the strands away from his face as he took in the sight of the room, bathed in the soft light of morning. The fire had died down to embers, its warm glow now just a faint memory. He moved to the hearth and carefully added a few more logs, watching as the flames flickered to life once again, casting a fresh warmth into the room. As the fire began to crackle, he turned toward the bird, which had remained still, its eyes never leaving him. The bond between them was palpable, an unspoken understanding that transcended words. The hawk blinked at him once, its talons clicking lightly on the perch, and the falconer, knowing the bird's readiness, approached with quiet steps. He reached out to stroke its feathers, his hand steady and sure, his fingers gliding over the sleek surface of its wings. The hawk's sharp eyes softened slightly, and for a moment the falconer was lost in the simplicity of the gesture, in the quiet rhythm of their shared connection. It was these moments, these small, unremarkable acts of care and attention, that anchored him to the world, that reminded him of the purpose in every action. The world outside may have been shifting, evolving, but here, in this small space, everything was as it had always been, still and constant. The falconer retrieved his gloves from the small wooden hook by the door, carefully slipping his hands into the worn leather, adjusting the fit with a practiced ease. He moved toward the coop, the hawk's talons clicking against the stone floor as it followed his every movement with a watchful eye. The morning air outside was cool, the mist clinging to the grass and the low-lying branches of the trees like a veil, obscuring the world just beyond the clearing. The falconer stepped into the coolness of the morning, the dew on the ground soaking through his boots as he made his way toward the garden. The herbs were still damp, their leaves glistening with the moisture of the early hour. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary, lavender, and thyme, the fragrances mixing in the cool breeze as the falconer passed by them, his fingers brushing lightly against the plants. The clearing was still quiet, the only sounds being the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds beginning to stir in the trees. The falconer turned toward the coop, his steps slow and deliberate as he moved to check on the hawk's perch. The bird had grown more alert now, its sharp eyes scanning the horizon as it settled into its post. There was a quiet intensity in the hawk's stance, a readiness that the falconer could sense in the way the bird's feathers ruffled slightly, as if it were preparing for something. The morning was full of promise, and the falconer could feel it in his bones. He opened the coop's small wooden gate, stepping back to allow the hawk to hop onto his gloved arm, the bird's talons sinking into the soft leather with practiced ease. The falconer adjusted his grip on the bird, his arms steady, and together they moved toward the clearing's edge, where the trees began to thicken and the path to the forest's heart began. It was here, in the quiet expanse of the woods, that the falconer felt most at home, his bond with the natural world deepening with every step. The hawk shifted slightly on his arm, its wings brushing against the falconer's cloak as they moved deeper into the forest. The air here was heavier, filled with the earthy scent of the trees and the dampness of the forest floor. The birds overhead were becoming more vocal now, their calls echoing through the canopy as the sun began to rise higher, casting slanted beams of light through the branches. The falconer paused for a moment, allowing the hawk to stretch its wings as they both took in the quiet beauty of the forest. The light danced through the leaves, illuminating the path ahead, and the air seemed to hum with life, as though the forest itself was waking up. There was a deep stillness in this place, a peace that seemed to settle around him like a familiar embrace. As the falconer stood there, his thoughts began to drift once more, not to the tasks of the day, but to the larger rhythm of life, the quiet movements of the earth, and the timeless dance between man and nature. The hawk's keen eyes scanned the treetops above, and the falconer felt a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that this moment, this connection between them, was enough. For now, there was nothing else to do but breathe in the cool morning air, listen to the sounds of the forest, and be present in the moment. The hawk's wings fluttered slightly, as if it too sensed the stillness, and the falconer smiled, his heart full with the simplicity of it all. This was the rhythm of life, not bound by time or expectation, but flowing with the natural world, unhurried and undisturbed. Together, they would continue on this path, following the forest's quiet lead, knowing that the journey ahead would unfold at its own pace, with no need for haste. The day had begun, and with it, a new chapter in their shared life. As they moved deeper into the woods, the falconer felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that no matter what the day brought, he was exactly where he needed to be. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as the falconer and his hawk ventured deeper into the forest. The trees loomed tall around them, their branches twisting and curling like ancient fingers reaching up toward the sky. The ground beneath their feet was soft with moss, and the occasional rustle of leaves signaled the presence of small creatures moving about their daily business. The falconer, accustomed to this solitude, moved with the silent grace of one who had long ago learned the rhythm of the forest. His boots pressed softly into the ground, his movements measured and deliberate, as if he were part of the forest itself. The hawk perched confidently on his arm, its sharp eyes scanning the world around them, ever alert to any movement, any shift in the environment that might signal a change. The quiet between them was palpable, not an awkward silence, but one of understanding, of a shared connection that needed no words. The falconer's thoughts were calm and centered as he moved, the gentle crunch of twigs beneath his feet the only sound breaking the stillness of the forest. His mind drifted not to the tasks ahead, but to the quiet peace that surrounded him, to the way the light filtered through the canopy above, casting soft shadows on the forest floor. He paused for a moment to take in the scene, his hand resting lightly on the hawk's feathers, feeling the warmth of the bird's body beneath the cool morning air. The forest was alive, not just in the movement of animals, but in the very breath of the earth itself, the air thick with life and possibility. He could hear the distant sound of a stream trickling through the underbrush, the occasional call of a bird echoing through the trees, and the rustle of the wind as it passed through. The leaves. It was a soundscape he knew well, one that had been his companion for many years. He felt a deep connection to this place, as if the forest had become a part of him, its rhythm matching his own. The hawk blinked up at him, its talons shifting slightly on his glove, and the falconer smiled, the bond between them unspoken but undeniable. Together, they were a part of this world, not separate from it, but woven into the fabric of nature itself. They continued their journey through the forest, the path ahead growing steeper as they moved toward the heart of the woods. The trees became denser, their trunks thicker, and the canopy above formed a dense, dark roof that blocked out much of the sunlight. The air grew cooler as they moved further into the depths of the forest, the temperature dropping with the shade. The falconer adjusted his cloak, wrapping it tighter around his shoulders as the chill seeped into his bones. Yet, despite the growing cold, there was a sense of warmth in the air, a sense of home that he had come to associate with this place. They came to a clearing, the trees parting to reveal a small, hidden pond, its surface still and reflective like a mirror. The water was crystal clear, and the falconer could see the stones at the bottom, smooth and worn from the passage of time. He paused at the edge of the water, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The pond was surrounded by dense foliage, tall, grasses swaying gently in the breeze, and flowering shrubs whose bright colors stood in sharp contrast to the green of the forest. The hawk, sensing the stillness, tilted its head slightly, its sharp eyes fixed on the surface of the water. The falconer followed its gaze, watching as the reflection of the trees rippled gently with the movement of the wind. He knelt by the water's edge, dipping his fingers into the cool liquid, feeling its smoothness against his skin. The quiet serenity of the moment wrapped around him, and he allowed himself to simply be present, to take in the beauty of this hidden corner of the world. It was moments like this, when time seemed to slow down and the world fell away, that he felt most at peace. The hawk shifted on his arm, its wings fluttering slightly as it adjusted its position. The falconer rose to his feet, his gaze lingering on the pond for a moment longer before he began to move again, his steps steady and purposeful. The forest, with all its mysteries and wonders, was waiting for them, and he was ready to continue their journey. They walked on, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves beneath them. The air was dense with the scent of earth and growing things, and the falconer breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the life of the forest. He could feel the connection to the land in every step, in every breath. It was as though the very ground beneath his feet was a part of him, its energy flowing through him, guiding him forward. The hawk, ever watchful, shifted its weight on his arm, its sharp eyes scanning the world around them. The falconer was aware of the bird's presence, the subtle pull of their shared bond, the silent communication that passed between them. It was a feeling that went beyond words, beyond action. It was the quiet understanding of two creatures who had lived together for years, who had forged a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew thicker, the path narrower. Light dimmed, and the forest became darker, the shadows stretching longer as the sun continued its journey across the sky. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of moss and damp leaves. The falconer could feel the weight of the world pressing in on him, but it was not a weight of burden or fear. It was the weight of the forest, of the ancient land that had stood for centuries before him and would continue long after he was gone. There was a sense of timelessness in this place, a sense that the forest existed in a space outside of time, where the passing of seasons and the flow of years were little more than whispers in the wind. A hawk shifted again, its feathers ruffling slightly, and the falconer reached out, his gloved hand brushing lightly against the bird's wings. Together, they moved forward, the silence of the forest enveloping them like a protective cloak. The journey was not one of haste or urgency, but one of slow, deliberate steps, of being present in the moment and moving with the rhythm of the earth. As the day wore on, the forest grew darker still, the trees closing in around them like a protective embrace. The falconer's heart beat steadily in his chest, his senses attuned to every sound, every shift in the air. He could hear the distant call of a lone wolf, the rustle of a deer moving through the underbrush, the soft, almost imperceptible hum of life all around them. It was a world of quiet chaos, of creatures living and dying, of seasons shifting and changing, of life continuing on in an endless cycle. And through it all, the falconer and his hawk moved forward, two creatures bound together by an unspoken bond, journeying deeper into the heart of the forest, where new discoveries and challenges awaited them. The path ahead was uncertain, but the falconer was ready. The forest was alive with possibility, and with each step, they moved closer to something greater than themselves. The path through the dense forest had become less defined, the trees pressing closer together as if shielding some hidden part of the world from view. The falconer moved forward with practiced ease, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, damp earth beneath him, the scent of wet moss and decaying leaves filling his senses with each step. His hawk perched quietly on his arm, its keen eyes scanning the environment with a watchful vigilance, unfazed by the dense growth around them. For a moment, they were alone in the heart of the woods, the quiet broken only by the distant call of a bird, or the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. The falconer's thoughts drifted away from the path ahead, lost in the rhythmic cadence of their journey. There was something timeless about this place, something ancient, and for a brief moment, he felt as though he were suspended in time itself, a part of the forest's heartbeat. The silence was thick, but not oppressive. It was a silence that seemed to hold its breath, allowing only the subtle sounds of the natural world to fill the air. The faintest wind stirred the tops of the trees, their branches creaking and swaying with an almost imperceptible rhythm, while the forest floor remained still beneath his feet. The air was cool, but not cold, and the sensation of walking deeper into the woods felt like a return to a place that existed outside the flow of time, a place where everything, even the smallest moment, seemed to hold its own kind of peace. He paused, lowering his arm slightly to let the hawk stretch its wings, its feathers rustling in the stillness. The bird seemed content, its sharp gaze never wavering as it surveyed the surroundings. It was as though they had both become part of the landscape, no longer separate entities, but a single unified presence in this hidden corner of the world. The falconer allowed himself to close his eyes for a moment, taking in the sounds of the forest with a deep breath. There was something comforting in the stillness, something that grounded him in the present. It was as if the forest itself had wrapped its arms around him, offering a moment of respite, a pause in the world that moved so quickly beyond the trees. There were no demands, no expectations here, only the slow and steady rhythm of the land itself. For a long while, the falconer stood like that, listening, breathing, feeling the weight of the world fall away. His thoughts were quiet, free of the usual distractions of the day. In this place, there was no rush, no need to hurry. Time itself seemed to slow down, as though the forest had cast its spell over him, allowing him to exist fully in this moment, without any other obligation. The hawk shifted slightly on his arm, the faintest flutter of its wings bringing him back to the present. The bird's attention had shifted, and its eyes were now fixed on a movement in the underbrush, its head tilting ever so slightly as it tracked whatever creature had disturbed the silence. The falconer smiled, the bond between them evident in the bird's calm, yet focused gaze. They were a team, not just in the physical sense, but in the way they communicated without words, the way their movements mirrored one another in the quiet rhythm of the forest. Without a word, the falconer adjusted his grip on the bird's perch, preparing to move again. The path before them grew darker, the trees pressing in closer together as the canopy above thickened. The soft light of the afternoon filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns across the ground. The forest seemed to close in around them, and yet there was no feeling of danger, only a deep sense of peace, as though they were being welcomed further into the heart of this ancient place. The falconer stepped forward once more, his pace unhurried but steady, the hawk on his arm now alert and poised, ready for whatever lay ahead. The quiet of the forest was punctuated by the occasional crack of a twig or the rustle of leaves, the subtle sounds of a world alive with hidden movements. The falconer's mind remained calm, his thoughts no longer focused on the outside world, but on the immediate moment, the feel of the hawk's talons resting lightly on his arm, the way the air seemed to thicken with each step, and the soft shifting of the forest around him. There was no destination in mind, no urgent need to arrive anywhere. This journey, like the many before it, was one of immersion, of presence. The trees, the earth, the very air around him all seemed to belong to the same unhurried flow, and he was content to be a part of that rhythm. As they walked, the path narrowed even further, and the dense undergrowth made it more difficult to see far ahead. The trees grew closer together, their trunks thick and gnarled, their bark rough with age. A small stream, its waters clear and cold, appeared in front of them, its surface glistening as it wound its way through the forest, cutting through the earth like a quiet vein of life. The falconer paused at the edge of the stream, watching the water flow with a calm assurance. The sound of the stream was soothing, its gentle gurgle a reminder of the constant movement of the world around him. He knelt by the water's edge, his fingers grazing the smooth stones beneath the surface. The coolness of the water sent a shiver up his spine, but the sensation was refreshing, grounding him even further in the present moment. The hawk shifted. On his arm once again, its sharp eyes scanning the area for any movement. The falconer took a deep breath, feeling the peace of the moment wash over him once again. The stream, the trees, the soft rustle of the leaves, it was all part of the same world, the same endless cycle. There was no rush, no hurry to leave. They were here in this moment, and that was enough. He rose slowly, his hand brushing the water one last time before he began to move again, his footsteps light on the forest floor. The hawk, still alert, followed his movements with a silent grace, its talons gripping his arm just enough to maintain its balance. Together, they continued their journey, the forest unfolding before them with each step. It was a place of stillness, of peace, a place where time moved differently, slower, and the falconer felt, for the first time in a long while, completely at home. The evening air had grown cooler, and the falconer found himself pausing at the edge of a clearing, his eyes drawn to the fading light of the sun as it dipped behind the thick line of trees. The forest, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, seemed to exhale a deep, peaceful breath, as though the world itself was settling into a calm, quiet rhythm. His hawk, ever watchful, shifted slightly on his arm, its feathers ruffling in the cool breeze that whispered through the branches. The silence of the moment felt profound, almost sacred, and the falconer closed his eyes for a brief second, allowing the stillness to fill him completely, the world's noise fading into the background as he immersed himself in the tranquility of the evening. There was something soothing about the gradual shift from day to night, the slow withdrawal of the sunlight, and the quiet emergence of the stars above. It felt as though time itself was taking a breath, pausing before continuing its relentless march forward. The hawk's gaze, sharp and unyielding, scanned the clearing, its eyes catching every subtle movement of the underbrush, every shifting shadow that danced on the ground. The falconer knew that even in the stillness, there was much to observe, much to learn. His thoughts were as calm and steady as the rhythm of the breeze, flowing from one moment to the next without urgency or disturbance. The trees stood tall and unmoving, their dark silhouettes etched against the slowly darkening sky, and the falconer felt a deep connection to them, as though he were a part of something ancient and eternal. He could feel the weight of the earth beneath him, solid and unchanging, and he allowed himself to become rooted in that presence. His connection to the forest was more than just physical, it was spiritual, a bond that transcended time. He had walked these paths many times before, yet each time felt like a new beginning, a new chapter in a story that was older than he could comprehend. The quiet of the forest at dusk was unlike any other. The day's noise, the busy scurrying of animals and the calls of birds faded away, replaced by a deep, contemplative silence. The falconer took another slow breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, the earthy scent of the forest mingling with the faint, sweet fragrance of herbs that had been released by the evening dew. His fingers lightly brushed the hawk's feathers, offering the bird a quiet reassurance, a reminder that they were not alone in this world. In the stillness, they were connected not just as falconer and bird, but as part of the living, breathing world that surrounded them. He could hear the faint rustle of leaves in the trees, the distant call of an owl, the gentle trickling of a stream somewhere beyond the clearing. It was a world full of sound, yes, but a world that understood the power of quiet, the importance of silence. The falconer turned his gaze upward, watching as the stars slowly began to emerge, their light faint but steady, flickering like distant candles in the vast, dark sky. The night was coming, but it was not a night of fear or dread. It was a night of peace, of rest. The hawk's head turned toward the stars as well, its sharp eyes catching the first twinkling points of light, and the falconer felt a moment of kinship with the bird, both of them attuned to the same rhythm, the same cycle of day and night. He could not help but feel small in the face of the sky, small in the face of the universe itself. And yet, that smallness did not bring discomfort. It was a humbling feeling, a reminder of how interconnected everything was, how every moment, every breath, was part of a much larger story. As the light of day slowly faded, the falconer stood still, his hawk perched quietly on his arm, both of them lost in the beauty of the evening. The wind had slowed, and the world seemed to hold its breath as though waiting for something waiting, for the night to fully arrive. He felt no need to move, no desire to break the spell of the moment. There was something profoundly right about this pause, this time of quiet reflection, and he let himself be present in it. The hawk shifted slightly, its wings flexing as it settled into the curve of his arm, its talons gently digging into the worn leather of the glove. The falconer knew the bird was alert, aware of every change in the air, every whisper of movement. That could indicate danger or opportunity. But for now, there was no need for vigilance. The night had not yet fully descended, and the forest was still bathed in the soft, fading light of the evening. As the darkness grew deeper, the falconer's thoughts turned inward. He thought of the years that had passed, of the many journeys he had taken, of the challenges and triumphs that had shaped his life. He thought of the people he had known, the lessons he had learned, and the quiet, steady rhythm that had always brought him back to this place, to this moment. And then, as the last of the daylight slipped away, he turned back toward the path that led him home. The hawk remained perched on his arm, its wings folded tightly against its sides, its sharp eyes scanning the world around them. They walked in silence, the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet the only sound that broke the stillness. The world around them seemed to fade into the background, as though the night itself had swallowed them whole. A falconer was content, at peace in a way that only the forest could offer. The path before them was long, but it was a path they had walked many times before, a path that would always lead them home. And as the first star shone brightly above, the falconer knew that, for now, this was enough. The moon hung high in the night sky, its silver light casting long shadows over the forest floor, the branches of the trees reaching upward like silent sentinels guarding the peace of the night. The falconer walked slowly, his boots brushing against the damp earth, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves and moss beneath him. The air was cool, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint earthy aroma of the forest after the rain. He felt the weight of the silence around him, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of stillness that comes only in the deep hours of the night, when the world has settled into its own natural rhythm, and even the wind seems to pause for a moment to listen. The falconer had walked these paths countless times before, yet each time felt new, as though the forest had a way of changing, even when it remained the same. He could feel the presence of the trees, the quiet energy of the earth beneath his feet, and the subtle hum of the world around him. The hawk, perched calmly on his arm, seemed to sense the stillness as well, its feathers shifting slightly as it adjusted its position. Its sharp eyes, ever watchful, scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, just the deep quiet of the night. The falconer smiled faintly to himself, a sense of peace washing over him. It was in moments like these that he felt most connected to the world, most at home. The busy distractions of the day seemed so far away, and in the solitude of the night, he could hear his own thoughts more clearly, without the noise of the world interfering. He stopped for a moment and closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the forest envelop him. The distant call of an owl echoed through the trees, a soft, haunting sound that seemed to carry on the wind. The rustling of leaves in the branches above was like a gentle whisper, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot was a reminder that the forest was alive, even in the stillness. The falconer took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp, clean air, and slowly exhaled. He had always found solace in the quiet of the night, in the moments when everything else faded away, leaving only the present moment, the only moment that truly mattered. It was a reminder that, in the grand scheme of things, everything else was temporary time, people, even life itself. But this moment, right here and now, was all that he had. It was a thought he often returned to, especially in the solitude of the forest, where there was no pressure, no expectations, just the simple act of being. The hawk let out a soft screech, its sharp cry cutting through the stillness of the night. The falconer glanced down at the bird, his gaze meeting the hawk's. The bird's eyes were bright, its feathers fluffed slightly as it adjusted its perch. The falconer could feel the bond between them, unspoken yet strong. It was a connection, forged over years of shared experience, of quiet moments like this one. There was no need for words between them. They understood each other perfectly, communicating through gestures, movement, and the rhythm of their lives together. The falconer felt the weight of the hawk's presence, but it was a comforting weight, a reminder that he was not alone in the world, that there was always something watching over him. It was a thought that gave him a sense of peace, a sense of belonging in a world that could often feel uncertain. He continued to walk, his steps slow and deliberate, letting the world unfold around him. The moonlight cast a soft glow on the path ahead, guiding him forward, and the forest seemed to open up before him, its vastness both humbling and comforting. He passed by a large rock, its surface smooth and weathered by time, and paused for a moment to run his hand along it, feeling the coolness of the stone beneath his fingers. It was a small gesture, but one that reminded him of the passage of time, of the many years he had spent walking these same paths, of the countless moments that had led him to this one. The hawk shifted slightly on his arm, its talons pressing into the leather of his glove as it adjusted its stance. The falconer smiled again, a quiet, contented smile. There was something about the bird's presence that always grounded him, always brought him back to the here and now, away from the distractions of the past or the future. With the hawk by his side, he felt connected to something greater than himself, something timeless, something that had always been there, waiting for him to notice. He continued walking, his mind drifting in and out of thoughts, but always returning to the present moment, to the feeling of the earth beneath his feet, the air in his lungs, and the hawk on his arm. The night stretched out before him, and he knew that he would continue walking, not out of any sense of destination, but simply for the sake of walking, for the sake of being. There was no rush, no need to hurry. The forest was a place of calm, of quiet, of stillness, and it was in these moments that the falconer felt most alive. The world outside the forest seemed so far away, so distant and disconnected from the quiet rhythm of the trees and the wind. He was content to leave it behind, content to simply be here, in this moment, with the hawk by his side and the night surrounding him. He paused again, looking up at the sky. The stars were clearer now, their light sharp and bright against the deep black canvas of the night. The moon hung like a silver coin in the sky, its light reflecting off the surface of the stream that ran nearby, casting a soft, shimmering glow on the water. The falconer took another deep breath, letting the cool night air fill his lungs. He felt a sense of peace wash over him, a sense of belonging in the world, not as an outsider, but as part of something much larger. The forest, the hawk, the moon, the stars, it was all connected, all part of the same rhythm, the same cycle, the same timeless flow of nature. He was but one small part of it, but that was enough. It was enough to be here now, in this moment. As the night deepened and the world around him quieted even further, the falconer continued to walk, his steps slow and steady, the hawk perched calmly on his arm. He knew that the night would pass, and that the day would eventually return, but for now, there was no need to worry about what would come next. For now, there was only the quiet of the night, the bond between man and bird, and the peace that comes with knowing that, in this moment, everything was as it should be. And so, as the stars twinkled above, and the forest settled into its own quiet rhythm, the falconer walked on, content in the stillness, content in the knowledge that, for now, he was exactly where he was meant to be. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in brilliant shades of purple and orange as the falconer stood at the edge of the clearing, his gaze fixed on the distant treetops. The breeze had picked up, rustling the leaves. Above him, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The falconer could feel the tension in the air, a subtle charge that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The hawk perched silently on his arm, its eyes scanning the horizon with a focused intensity, as though it too could sense a shift in the atmosphere. There was a stillness to the moment, a quiet before the storm, and the falconer stood there, rooted in place, as if waiting for some sign, some indication of what was to come. The wind carried with it the first hints of autumn, the coolness of the season creeping into the air as the day began to give way to evening. The leaves of the trees were beginning to turn, their vibrant greens fading into shades of gold and red, the first signs of the changing season. The falconer took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp, cool air, and slowly exhaled, letting the tension in his body fade. He had been walking these paths for years, And yet there was always something new to be discovered, some subtle shift in the landscape, in the way the wind moved, in the sounds of the forest. Even now, after all this time, he could still feel the magic of the land, the connection to something ancient and untouchable. The hawk shifted on his arm, its feathers ruffling slightly as the wind picked up. Its sharp eyes locked onto something. In the distance, its body tense with anticipation. The falconer followed its gaze, his eyes scanning the trees. But there was nothing there, just the shifting shadows of the approaching night. He tilted his head, listening to the sounds around. Him, the rustling of the leaves, the distant call of an owl, the chirping of crickets. The world was alive, but there was a quiet urgency to it, as if the forest itself was preparing for something. The falconer knew that something was about to change. It was the same feeling he'd experienced all those years ago when he first came to this place, when he first felt the pull of the land, when he first met the hawk. It was the feeling of destiny, of being drawn to something greater than oneself, of being part of a story much larger than his own. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the forest wash over him. The world around him felt ancient, as though it had been here long before him, long before the first footsteps of mankind had ever touched the earth. It was a place of quiet power, where the elements themselves seemed to hold sway, where the wind could whisper secrets to those who were willing to listen. And the falconer had listened, had learned to read the language of the land, to understand the subtle cues of nature, to sense the changes in the air before they arrived. The hawk shifted again, its feathers rustling as it adjusted its position. On his arm, its talons dug into the leather of his glove, a familiar pressure that grounded him, reminding him that he was not alone in this moment, that he was part of something larger than himself. The bird was a reflection of the land itself, strong and untamed, yet bound by a deep connection to the falconer, a bond forged over years of shared experiences, of trust and mutual respect. The wind howled now, a rising gust that sent the branches of the trees swaying, the leaves spinning in a dance of autumn colors. The falconer tightened his grip on the hawk's perch, steadying the bird as the wind tugged at them both. There was a wildness to the air now, a sense of urgency that mirrored the falconer's own thoughts. The world was shifting, and he could feel it in the very bones of the land. He could feel the change coming, a change that would alter everything. The hawk let out a soft call, its voice carrying through the wind, a signal of readiness. The falconer's heart quickened, and he felt the stirrings of something deep within him, something primal and instinctual, a call to action that he could not ignore. He turned his gaze back to the horizon, his eyes scanning the land, looking for the source of the shift, for the event that was about to unfold. He could sense it now, a presence on the wind, a shift in the earth beneath his feet. It was as though the land itself was calling to him, urging him forward, urging him to prepare for what was to come. The hawk stretched its wings, its sharp eyes gleaming in the dimming light. The falconer could feel its power, its strength, and he knew that it was ready for whatever lay ahead. The wind howled louder now, as if in answer to the bird's call, and the falconer felt a shiver run down his spine. It was time to face whatever had been set in motion, whatever had been waiting in the wings. He took a step forward, his boots crunching in the dry leaves beneath him. The hawk lifted from his arm, soaring into the air with a single powerful beat of its wings. The falconer stood still for a moment, watching the bird disappear into the sky, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt the connection between them, a bond that transcended words, a bond that could not be broken. The wind carried the birds, called back to him, a reminder that he was not alone, that he was part of something much greater than himself. The falconer took another step forward, the wind tugging at his cloak, urging him onward. There was no turning back now. The forest had spoken, and it was time to listen. The falconer felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, but it was not a burden. It was a call to action, a call to fulfill his purpose. And with that thought in mind, he walked deeper into the forest, the hawk's call still echoing in his ears, ready for whatever came next. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth as the falconer ventured deeper into the forest, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, moss-covered ground with each step. The once familiar path had faded into the underbrush, swallowed by the untamed wildness of the forest. But he walked on, undeterred, his heart steady and his mind focused. The hawk perched high above him on a branch, circled overhead, its sharp eyes scanning the horizon with a precision born of years of training and experience. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of thunder, a storm rolling. In from the west, its dark clouds creeping across the sky like an ominous wave. The falconer could feel the change in the air, a heaviness that settled over the land, as if the forest itself was preparing for something. He slowed his pace, allowing the weight of the moment to settle around him. The leaves rustled in the trees above, whispering secrets in the language of the wind, and the falconer felt a familiar pulse of energy, a call to action that he could not ignore. His hand instinctively reached for the leather strap that held the hawk's perch, a gesture that had become second nature over the years. But the bird was not there. It had flown off, its powerful wings carrying it higher into the sky, into the darkening clouds. He paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on the bird as it soared above the treetops, its silhouette a dark streak against the growing storm. The wind howled now, tugging at the falconer's cloak, urging him onward, but he stood still, watching the bird with a quiet intensity. It was as if the hawk was beckoning him, calling him to follow, to step into the unknown and face whatever lay ahead. And so, without a second thought, the falconer began to move again, his steps purposeful, his eyes locked on the bird above. The storm was coming fast now, the sky darkening with every passing moment, and the first drops of rain began to fall, heavy and cold against his skin. The sound of distant thunder rumbled through the trees, a low growl that reverberated through the forest, as if nature itself was warning him of the challenge ahead. But the falconer did not falter. He had faced countless storms in his life, both literal and metaphorical, and he knew that this too would pass. The hawk circled above, its wings cutting through the air with effortless grace, and the falconer quickened his pace, following the bird through the dense underbrush, his eyes never leaving its path. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees thickening, their trunks rising like ancient sentinels that had witnessed countless seasons come and go. The rain began to fall harder now, drenching him to the bone, but the falconer didn't mind. He was used to the elements, had long since learned to move through the world with the patience of the land itself. His hand remained steady on the leather perch as he moved, the bird's presence guiding him, its sharp eyes watching over him as it always had. The storm was fierce now, the wind whipping through the trees, the sound of thunder shaking the earth. Beneath his feet, but still, the falconer pressed on, trusting in the bird's guidance. His thoughts turned inward as he moved, remembering the many years he had spent in this forest, the countless hours he had spent in silence, listening to the whispers of the trees, the murmur of the wind, the call of the animals. He had come to know the land like an old friend, its rhythms, its seasons, its secrets. And now, as the storm raged around him, he felt a deep sense of connection to it all, as though the forest itself was calling him home. The hawk led him through the rain, its wings cutting through the storm like a knife through water, and the falconer followed, trusting in the bond between them, a bond forged through years of shared experience, of mutual respect. They were two halves of a whole, each relying on the other to navigate the wild unknown. The storm seemed to intensify with every passing moment, the sky blackening, the wind howling, but the falconer was undaunted. He had walked this path before, had faced the storms of life and the wild challenges that had come his way. He knew that with the hawk by his side, there was nothing he could not face, nothing he could not overcome. They were a team, a partnership bound by trust and respect. And so, through the rain and the wind, they pressed on, moving deeper into the heart of the forest, their destination unknown, but their resolve unshakable. The sound of the storm was deafening now, the thunder cracking above them, but the falconer's focus remained sharp. He had come for a reason, had come to face whatever challenge lay ahead. The hawk, ever watchful, led the way, its eyes scanning the path, its body coiled with anticipation. The falconer's heart beat in time with the rhythm of the forest, with the beat of the wind, with the pulse of the storm. And as they moved deeper into the heart of the wild, the falconer felt something shift within him, a sense of purpose that had been absent for so long. He had been searching for something beyond the routine, beyond the safety of the familiar. And now, as he followed the hawk through the storm, he realized that he had found it, had found the path that would lead him to the answers he sought. The rain fell harder now, the forest darkening with the oncoming night, but the falconer pressed on, his steps steady, his heart steady, his focus unwavering. There was no turning back now. He was on the path he was meant to walk, and he would walk it until the end. The hawk, soaring above him, called out, a sharp, clear cry that cut through the storm, and the falconer, following its lead, moved forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead, ready to embrace the wild call of the storm. The rain continued to fall in torrents, drenching the falconer and his hawk, but neither seemed to notice. Their connection to each other and the land far stronger than any weather could dampen. They had been walking through the dense forest for what felt like hours, but time had become irrelevant in the midst of the storm. The trees around them towered high, their twisted branches reaching out like ancient hands, guiding them deeper into the heart of the wilderness. The falconer's senses were sharpened. Every rustling leaf, every distant call of a creature, every shift in the wind spoke to him in a language he had learned over the years, a language of instinct and intuition. His hand, though wet and cold, never wavered in its grip on the leather perch, his bond with the hawk as unbreakable as ever. The hawk, perched high above, led the way, its wings slicing through the wind with ease, its eyes scanning the darkening forest for any signs of danger or prey. The storm raged on, but the falconer felt a growing sense of purpose with each step, as though the forest itself was guiding him toward something greater, something unknown. As they pushed forward, the landscape began to change. The path that had once been clear and well-trodden was now overgrown, the underbrush thick and wild, but the falconer moved with confidence, his eyes locked on the hawk, trusting it to show the way. The wind howled through the trees, the sound of it like a deep, ancient voice calling out, but the falconer was not afraid. He had faced far worse storms in his life, both literal and metaphorical, and he knew that this was simply another challenge to be met with patience and resolve. The hawk dipped low, its wings cutting through the heavy rain, and the falconer followed its movements, his boots sinking into the wet earth as he moved. There was something primal about this journey, something that felt as though it had been written into his very being. The forest, in all its wildness and mystery, was alive, and he was a part of it, a small but integral piece of its grand design. They passed through a clearing, the trees thinning just enough to allow a brief respite from the storm. The falconer paused for a moment, his chest heaving with each breath, his eyes scanning the area around him. He had the distinct feeling that they were not alone, that something was watching them from the shadows. But he saw nothing, heard nothing out of the ordinary, and yet the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a quiet alertness settling in his bones. The hawk, sensing the same tension, let out a soft cry, its sharp eyes scanning the tree line as it perched on a nearby branch. The falconer nodded, his own senses alert, and he motioned for the hawk to continue. They moved on, the storm now, seeming to lessen, the rain turning to a soft mist that hung in the air like a veil, shrouding the forest in an eerie silence. It was in this silence that the falconer felt the presence of something ancient, something powerful that had been watching them all along. The path grew narrower, the trees closing in around them, their roots twisting out of the earth like the fingers of a sleeping giant. The falconer could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, as though the very ground beneath his feet had been walked by countless others before him. He had reached the heart of the forest, the place where time seemed to stand still, where the natural world was at its most raw and untamed. It was here that he had come, not by chance, but by design. And it was here that he would find what he had been searching for. The hawk, ever watchful, swooped low, its sharp talons grazing the tips of the ferns that lined the forest floor, and the falconer followed, his steps steady and deliberate. The air was thick with the scent of moss, earth, and wet leaves. The forest alive with the sound of its own breathing, as though the very land itself was exhaling in time with his movements. He felt it then, the shift in the air, the change in the forest's pulse. The hawk landed on a large rock near the base of an ancient oak tree, its wings folding neatly against its body as it turned to face him. The falconer approached slowly, his heart racing in anticipation. He could feel the weight of the moment, the quiet intensity of the forest around him, and he knew that this was the place, the moment he had been waiting for. As he reached the hawk, he placed a hand gently on its sleek feathers, the bird's body warm beneath his touch. The hawk blinked, its eyes meeting his with an understanding that went beyond words, a silent acknowledgement of their bond. The falconer stood still for a moment, his mind quiet, his breath steady. He had come here for a reason, to face something deep within the forest, something that called to him from the shadows. And now, with the hawk by his side, he felt ready. The storm had passed, the rain had ceased, and the forest was once again bathed in the soft light of twilight. The air was still, the earth silent, as though the entire world had paused, waiting for the next move. The falconer took a deep breath, feeling the coolness of the evening settle into his lungs, and with a final glance at the hawk, he stepped forward, deeper into the heart of the forest. It was here, in the stillness of the wild, that he would discover what lay hidden beneath the surface, what had been waiting for him all along. The deeper the falconer ventured into the heart of the forest, the more the world around him seemed to change, the very air thickening with a sense of ancient purpose, as though every step he took was a ritual, every movement a part of a larger pattern he could not yet see. His boots, once firm and steady on the well-worn paths, now sank into the soft, damp earth, each step muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves, while the towering trees loomed overhead, their twisted trunks and gnarled roots forming an almost impenetrable barrier, forcing him to weave and twist through the dense underbrush. Yet, despite the difficulty of the terrain, there was a serenity in his movements, a calmness in the way his body responded to the forest's embrace, as if the land itself was guiding him, urging him onward with silent encouragement. The hawk, perched effortlessly on his arm, seemed at ease in the growing silence, its sharp eyes scanning the surrounding woods, ever vigilant for any sign of movement, its feathers ruffled by the occasional gust of wind that whispered through the trees. They continued on in this manner for what felt like an eternity, though time had long since ceased to have meaning in the depths of the forest. The day was fading, the sun sinking lower behind the thick canopy of leaves, casting long stretched shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly before them, as though the forest was trying to swallow them whole. But the falconer did not falter. He had come here for a reason, to face something hidden deep within the earth, something ancient and forgotten, and he was determined to find it, to uncover the mysteries that lay buried beneath the soil and roots of the forest. There was a sense of inevitability in the air, a quiet pressure building with every step, as if the land itself was preparing to reveal its secrets, to show him the hidden paths that only a few had walked before. And yet, the deeper he went, the more he sensed something was amiss. The forest, once a place of tranquil beauty, now felt oppressive, its atmosphere thick with an unseen presence that seemed to watch them, waiting for them to make the wrong move. The hawk, too, was becoming restless, its sharp eyes darting from side to side, its wings fluttering, as though it could sense the tension in the air. The falconer's heart quickened, his instincts screaming that they were no longer alone in the forest, but he pressed on, driven by a force he could not explain, a pull deep within his chest that urged him forward, despite the growing unease that settled in the pit of his stomach. As they pushed through the thick brush, the forest seemed to open up before them, revealing a small clearing that was eerily still, untouched by the wind, the air thick with an unnatural silence. The ground here was different, too no longer soft and spongy, but hard, cracked and dry, as though the very earth had been scorched. The falconer stepped into the clearing, his senses heightened, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end, as though something was watching him from the shadows. The hawk let out a soft cry, its eyes locked on something in the distance, and the falconer followed its gaze, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the figure standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the fading light. It was tall, its shape barely discernible in the twilight, and it stood motionless, as though waiting for him. The falconer's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The figure was cloaked, its face hidden in the shadows of its hood, but there was something unmistakably familiar about its presence, something that seemed to resonate deep within him, a memory stirring from the depths of his soul. The hawk let out another soft cry, its wings fluttering as it lifted from his arm, instinctively sensing the danger that was looming. Without thinking, the falconer reached for his falconer's glove, his fingers tightening around the leather as he prepared for whatever was to come. The figure did not move, but its presence was overwhelming, its energy almost tangible, as though it was drawing the falconer in with a magnetic force he could not resist. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, every muscle in, his body on high alert, but still, the figure did not speak, did not move. It was as if time had stopped, the world around them held in a suspended moment, waiting for something, waiting for him to make the next move. The falconer's mind raced, his thoughts a blur as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Who was this figure? Why was it here? What was it waiting for? And why did it feel as though it had been waiting for him, specifically, to come? He felt an overwhelming sense of urgency, a need to understand, to find the answers that had eluded him for so long. He could not turn back now. The path before him, though shrouded in mystery, was the only way forward, and the figure in the clearing, though silent and still, was somehow the key to unlocking the secrets that lay hidden within the forest's depths. With one final glance at the hawk, the falconer stepped forward, his hand outstretched, his heart heavy with both fear and anticipation. As the figure slowly raised its head, revealing a face that was both familiar and alien, a face that seemed to belong to no time, no place, but was somehow a part of him nonetheless. As the figure's eyes met his, the falconer felt a rush of recognition flood his mind, as though the last piece of a puzzle had finally fallen into place. And in that moment, he knew that his journey the one that had brought him to this place, was about to reach its culmination. Whatever lay ahead, whatever secrets the forest held, he was ready to face it. Together, with the hawk at his side, he would uncover the truth of his past, the truth of the forest, and the truth of the world. Around him, the storm had passed, the darkness had fallen, and now the path ahead was clear. The falconer stood in the clearing, the strange figure before him slowly lowering its hood, revealing eyes that shimmered with an otherworldly light. The hawk perched on his arm, its feathers ruffling slightly in the cool evening breeze, but even it seemed unsettled by the figure's presence. There was a quiet intensity in the air, as though the entire forest had held its breath in anticipation, waiting for something to unfold. The figure's face was pale, almost ethereal, but its features were sharp and well-defined, as though carved from stone. Yet there was a softness to its gaze, an understanding that resonated deep within the falconer, though he could not fully explain why. It spoke without words, its eyes telling a story that reached back through time, a story that seemed to echo in the falconer's mind. He felt a strange pull, an irresistible urge to step closer, to understand what lay hidden beneath the surface of this encounter. The world around him seemed to blur, the trees and the sky melding into one vast, swirling mass of colors. The scent of pine and earth mixing with something unfamiliar, something ancient. The figure's lips parted slightly, and for a moment, the falconer thought it would speak, but no words came. Instead, there was only a soft whisper, like the rustling of leaves in a distant wind. But it was more than just sound. It was a presence, a voice without form, and it filled the air around them. "You have come," the whisper seemed to say, and the falconer felt a strange shiver run down his spine. The words were not spoken aloud, but he heard them as clearly as if they had been, resonating within his chest like the thrum of a distant drum. He took a step forward, his boots crunching softly on the dry earth, the world shifting with each movement. The hawk remained still, its sharp eyes watching the figure with the same intensity, but it made no move to fly, as though it too understood that this was no ordinary moment. The figure raised one hand, its fingers long and delicate, as though beckoning him closer. Without thinking, the falconer stepped forward again, his heart pounding in his chest, and as he did, the shadows around him seemed to deepen, stretching and twisting in the fading light. The forest held its breath, and for the first time since entering this strange place, the falconer felt a profound silence settle over the land, a silence that was neither peaceful nor unsettling, but simply waiting. The figure's hand lowered. Slowly, and as it did, a flicker of movement passed across the falconer's peripheral vision, a blur of shadow, a flicker of light, and he turned his head instinctively, only to find himself staring at a darkened passage, a narrow path that wound deeper into the heart of the forest, its entrance barely visible behind the mass of ancient trees. The figure had not moved, but the air around it had changed. The once quiet atmosphere had thickened, as though something was unfolding just beyond his reach. The path before him seemed to beckon, urging him forward, but there was something strange about it, something disorienting. The falconer took another step, his eyes fixed on the path, but as he did, the shadows around him seemed to shift and sway, distorting the landscape as though the very fabric of reality was warping before his eyes. The hawk let out a soft cry, and for a moment the falconer hesitated, unsure whether he should proceed. Yet something deep within him knew that this was the next step in his journey, that whatever lay ahead in the depths of the forest, he was meant to face it. The figure watched him with those unblinking eyes, its gaze unreadable, but the falconer felt no fear, only a strange sense of calm. He nodded once, as though acknowledging some unspoken truth, and took a step toward the darkened path. The moment His foot touched the ground. The world shifted again, the trees seeming to pull back as the path opened wider before him, revealing a tunnel of gnarled branches and thick underbrush. The air grew cooler as he stepped further into the passage, and the sounds of the forest faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the soft crunch of his footsteps on the dry earth. The hawk remained perched on his arm, its talons digging into the leather glove, but it did not struggle. Instead, it seemed focused, its sharp eyes scanning the shadows ahead. As he moved deeper, the forest grew darker still, the canopy above thickening to block out what little light remained, and the once familiar sounds of the woods disappeared entirely, replaced by the soft rustling of something unseen, moving just out of reach. He felt a coldness in the air now, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into his bones. And yet he pressed on, driven by a force he could not name. The path seemed to stretch endlessly before him, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. But still, he walked, each step taking him further from the clearing where he had first encountered the figure, and deeper into the heart of the forest. Time had no meaning here. It felt as though hours passed in the blink of an eye, and yet no time at all had passed. The falconer's senses were on high alert, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. But there was also a growing sense of inevitability, a feeling that he was on the verge of discovering something he had been searching for his entire life, something that had eluded him for as long as he could remember. The shadows around him deepened, and just when he thought he could go no further, the path suddenly opened up again, revealing a small clearing bathed in a pale, ethereal light. The trees here were twisted and strange, their bark a dull gray that seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and the air was thick with the scent of something sweet and decayed. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, weathered and ancient, its surface covered in moss and lichen, but still standing strong against the passage of time. The figure was there, waiting for him, its eyes glowing with the same unearthly light. And as the falconer stepped forward, he felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. This was the place. This was the moment. The answer was here, hidden in the stones, in the earth beneath his feet, and as he approached the altar, the air seemed to crackle with anticipation, the shadows swirling around him as if urging him to take the next step. And so, with a final deep breath, he placed his hand on the stone, feeling its cold surface beneath his fingertips, and in that instant, everything changed. The sun had long dipped behind the horizon, casting the clearing into the soft hues of twilight as the falconer stood still, gazing up at the sky where his hawk soared high above him, the bird's wings cutting through the cool evening air with precise, measured grace. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, a reminder that the forest was both home and sanctuary, a place where silence spoke louder than any word, and the rhythm of the land flowed like a steady heartbeat. Beneath his feet, his eyes followed the hawk's every movement, watching as the bird glided effortlessly, its keen eyes scanning the landscape below with an unspoken knowing, its movements more fluid than mechanical, more natural than trained. There was a time, long ago, when these flights had been full of uncertainty, a time when the bird had faltered in the air, unsure of its wings, unsure of its place in the sky. But now, the falconer saw nothing but strength in those soaring arcs, nothing but mastery in every calculated turn. His bond with the hawk had been forged over years of shared practice, of silent understanding, of patience and perseverance. It was a bond that needed no words, for in the quiet exchange between man and bird, communication was written in the silent beat of wings, in the subtle shifting of weight as the hawk landed on his arm, in the trust that passed between them without a single sound. As the hawk circled once more, higher into the sky, the falconer allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. This bird, this wild creature, had become an extension of himself, a living testament to the slow, deliberate work that had gone into training it, into learning each other's rhythms. And in that moment, standing beneath the fading light of the sun, he felt a deep satisfaction that could only come from years of dedication, years of trusting the process, and years of watching his hawk grow from a hesitant fledgling to the confident predator it was now. The hawk's wings beat once more, and as the bird came into a smooth descent, the falconer extended his arm, his leather glove waiting patiently for the hawk to land. The bird responded with effortless grace, talons sinking into the glove with a soft thud, its feathers ruffling as it settled into place. The falconer spoke no words, for none were needed. He simply stood there, holding the bird, feeling the weight of its trust settle into his arm, feeling the bond between them solidify with each passing moment. Together, they turned back toward the small hut at the edge of the clearing, the day drawing to a close as the shadows lengthened and the air grew cooler. There was no rush, no urgency in the falconer's steps. Every motion was measured, deliberate, a reflection of the life he had chosen, a life that valued patience, presence, and the quiet rituals that defined each day. The hawk, its sharp eyes still alert to the sounds of the world around it, perched silently on the falconer's arm, a silent companion in the stillness of the evening. The world around them seemed to slow as they walked, the only sound the crunch of their footsteps on the earth, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze, and the distant calls of night birds beginning to stir in the trees. They reached the coop, and the falconer carefully opened the gate, allowing the hawk to step down onto its perch. The bird settled into place, its feathers sleek and smooth as it adjusted itself for the night. The falconer closed the gate gently, ensuring that the hawk was safe and secure for the evening, before turning back to the hut. The fire inside had begun to burn low, its warm glow flickering against the stone walls, casting long shadows that danced on the floor. The falconer paused for a moment, letting the peace of the evening settle into his bones. There was no rush to do anything, no need to hurry. He had accomplished what he set out to do that day, to work with his hawk, to guide it, to help it grow. And now, as the evening stretched out before him, he felt the weight of the day's efforts lift from his shoulders, replaced by a deep sense of contentment. He stepped inside the hut, closing the door behind him, and moved to the hearth, adding a log to the fire. The flames responded with a soft crackle, warming the room as the falconer sat on the edge of his cot, his hands resting on his knees as he let the calmness of the moment wash over him. Outside, the last light of the day faded completely, and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, their distant light casting a soft glow over the land. The falconer looked up at the stars, his thoughts quieting as he reflected on the bond he had with his hawk, the life he had built in this peaceful corner of the world, and the journey that had brought him here. He had lived a life of simplicity, of quiet work, and of trust in the natural rhythms of the world around him. And as he sat in the warmth of the fire, surrounded by the stillness of the forest, he knew that this was enough, that this life, with its slow rhythms and gentle moments, was everything he had ever wanted. The fire burned low, its embers glowing softly, and the falconer closed his eyes, letting the quiet embrace of the evening carry him into a peaceful sleep. Tomorrow would come, just as today had, but for now, there was nothing more to do but rest, knowing that he had lived today exactly as it was meant to be lived. The falconer awoke with the first whispers of dawn creeping into the hut, the soft light filtering through the slats of the wooden walls, casting delicate patterns on the floor. He stretched quietly, the familiar ache in his muscles a reminder of the life he had chosen, a life that required patience, strength, and the quiet acceptance of nature's rhythm. Outside, the world was still, wrapped in the hushed silence of early morning, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for the sun to rise fully and stir life into motion. The air was crisp, cool with the lingering chill of night, and as the falconer rose from his cot and moved toward the hearth, he felt the weight of the night's peace still heavy on his shoulders. The fire had burned low, but there were enough embers to coax a new flame to life, and he knelt beside it, blowing gently to encourage the flicker of warmth that would soon fill the room. The scent of smoke filled his lungs, a familiar and comforting fragrance that had become a part of him over the years, just as the soft crackle of the fire had become a soundtrack to his quiet days. He added a few small logs to the flame, watching. As they caught and began to burn, the light growing brighter, casting shadows on the walls. As he worked, his thoughts wandered, drifting like the smoke curling upward from the hearth. He thought of the hawk, resting in its coop, its feathers sleek and calm as it waited for the day to begin. The bond between them was unspoken, a silent understanding that had been forged over countless moments like this one, moments where time seemed to stretch and contract, where the world outside seemed to pause, and all that mattered was the present. The falconer smiled softly, the corners of his mouth lifting in quiet satisfaction. There was no rush, no need to hurry. The day would unfold as it always did, with the same steady rhythm that had marked his life for years. Once the fire had settled, he moved to the small window, opening it just enough to let the morning air slip in. The scent of dew-soaked earth and fresh pine greeted him, and for a moment he simply stood there, breathing deeply, letting the peace of the morning wash over him. The forest outside was beginning to stir, the soft murmur of the wind through the trees, the only sound breaking the silence. Birds were waking, their calls echoing through the branches, and the falconer could hear the rustle of small animals as they moved through the underbrush, their movements quick and quiet. He closed the window, the faintest sound of wood creaking, as the latch clicked into place, and moved to the table where the day's tasks awaited him. He worked with the same steady focus that had always defined him, each motion deliberate and sure. There was leather to be stitched, a new set of straps to be fitted to the falconry equipment, and the hawk's talons needed to be carefully trimmed and maintained. The falconer had learned to appreciate the quiet tasks, the ones that seemed insignificant to others, but that were essential to his way of life. Each stitch, each adjustment, each small act of care was a reflection of his connection to the bird, to the land, and to the rhythm of nature that had become his world. The morning passed slowly, the sun creeping higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing outside. When he was finished, the falconer stood and moved to the coop, his steps soft on the earth, the ground still cool beneath his boots. The hawk was waiting for him, perched calmly on its branch, its sharp eyes following his every movement. The falconer reached out, his gloved hand steady as the bird hopped onto his arm, its talons curling gently around the leather. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the hawk's presence, the silent strength that radiated from it. The bond between them was a thing of beauty, a dance of trust and respect that had taken years to cultivate. The falconer knew that the hawk was not just a companion, it was a reflection of himself, a mirror of the stillness, patience, and quiet strength that defined him. He stepped outside, the hawk resting lightly on his arm, and they moved together. Through the clearing, the early light casting soft shadows on the ground. The world was waking up around them, the forest alive with the sounds of morning. As the falconer walked, he felt a deep sense of belonging, as though every step he took was in harmony with the earth beneath him, as though the trees, the birds, the wind, and the sky were all part of a greater whole, and he too was a small but essential part of it. They reached the training post, and the falconer set the hawk down, his gloved hand releasing the bird with a gentle movement. The hawk stood still for a moment, its feathers ruffling slightly in the breeze, its sharp eyes scanning the landscape around them. And then, with a sudden burst of motion, it took flight, soaring into the sky with effortless grace, its wings beating strongly as it climbed higher and higher. The falconer stood watching, his gaze fixed on the bird, feeling the connection between them, feeling the silent communication that passed through the air. He didn't need to give a command. The hawk knew exactly what to do. It circled above him, its wings cutting through the air, and the falconer knew that this moment, this simple flight, was a triumph in itself. The hawk was no longer the hesitant, unsure bird that had first come to him. It was strong, confident, and free. The falconer felt a swell of pride, but it wasn't the kind of pride that came from personal accomplishment. It was the pride of seeing something grow, something that had once been fragile and uncertain, now standing strong and steady in the world. He could feel the hawk's freedom, its wildness, and he knew that this was what they had been working toward all along. The bird landed smoothly back on the post, its wings folding neatly against its body, and the falconer stepped forward, extending his arm. The hawk hopped onto his gloved arm, its talons resting lightly against the leather, and together they returned to the co-op. The day was far from over, but the falconer allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The tasks of the day would continue, but for now, he stood there in the peace of the morning, feeling the stillness of the world around him, knowing that the bond between him and his hawk was as strong as ever. As the falconer stood in the stillness of the forest, with the hawk perched silently on his arm, he felt the pulse of the land beneath his boots, the ancient rhythm of the earth that had been unchanged for centuries. The trees around him were thick and gnarled, their branches reaching high above, intertwining to form a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft, dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air was heavy with the scent of moss, earth, and the faint sweetness of wildflowers that bloomed at the edges of the clearing. The breeze that passed through the forest was gentle, barely disturbing the leaves, and the occasional bird call echoed from above, adding a musical backdrop to the quiet symphony of the forest. There was no hurry here, no rush to move from one task to the next. The falconer had learned long ago that in this place, in this life, there was no need to force anything. The forest, the hawk, and even the passing of time followed their own rhythms, and it was his task to move with them, not against them. The hawk, as always, was alert, its sharp eyes scanning the surroundings with a quiet intensity. Its feathers, sleek and well-maintained, rippled slightly in the breeze, and the falconer could feel the subtle tension in the bird's body as it adjusted to its perch. It was a calm, focused tension, the kind that came from years of training and mutual understanding. They were a team, not through words or commands, but through silent communication, a bond formed over countless days spent together. As the falconer moved through the forest, he noticed the small changes that came with the turning of the seasons. The leaves on the trees had begun to change color, their bright green hues giving way to the yellows, reds, and oranges of autumn. The air had a crispness to it now, the warmth of summer slowly retreating as the cooler winds of fall began to make their presence felt. The ground beneath his feet was soft with fallen leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot was the only sound that broke the silence. He made his way toward the stream that ran through the forest, its water clear and cold, rushing over smooth stones with a soft, soothing murmur. The hawk remained perched on his arm, its eyes focused on the path ahead, as though it were attuned to every movement, every shift in the air. The falconer had always felt a deep connection to the natural world around him, but in moments like this, he felt it more keenly than ever. It was as if the land itself was alive, each tree, each rock, each gust of wind a part of something larger, something ancient and enduring. They reached the stream, and the falconer paused, allowing the hawk to take in its surroundings. The bird stretched its wings slightly, testing the air, its sharp eyes scanning the water and the rocks along the bank. The falconer stood quietly, watching the hawk, feeling the connection between them. It was a simple moment, but one filled with meaning. The hawk, as always, was in tune with the environment, its movements and instincts as sharp and focused as ever. The falconer reached down to the water's edge, dipping his hand into the cool stream, feeling the refreshingly cold water rush over his fingers. He could hear the faint rustling of leaves above him, the distant call of a raven, and the soft gurgling of the stream as it wound its way through the forest. The hawk shifted on his arm, its talons adjusting to the leather of the glove, and the falconer turned his attention back to the bird. It was a moment of peace, a moment of connection with the world around him. He could feel the weight of the hawk on his arm, its talons resting lightly against the leather, its wings tucked neatly against its body. He stood there for a long while, simply enjoying the quiet, allowing the forest to settle around him. There was no rush, no need to move on to the next task. In the forest, time seemed to slow, the hours stretching out like the long shadows of the trees. The falconer knew that the day would unfold as it always did, but in moments like this, it didn't matter. He was content to simply be, to exist in this space, in this moment, with the hawk and the land and the steady rhythm of nature that pulsed beneath him. After a time, the falconer gently lifted the hawk from his arm, allowing it to spread its wings and take flight. The bird soared into the air, its wings beating strongly as it climbed higher, disappearing into the canopy above. The falconer watched it for a moment, feeling the surge of pride and satisfaction that always came with seeing the bird take flight. It was a reminder of how far they had come together, how much they had learned, and how deeply they had come to understand each other. The hawk circled overhead for a moment, its wings catching the sunlight, casting a fleeting shadow on the forest floor below. Then, with a graceful dive, it returned to its perch on the falconer's arm. The falconer smiled, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. They had worked together for years, and yet each flight, each moment, still held a sense of wonder. As the hawk settled back onto his arm, the falconer felt the weight of its presence, its sharp eyes focused on the world around them. They were a team, as they had always been, and they would continue to be, as long as the forest stood and the wind blew. Together, they would face whatever came their way, moving with the rhythm of the land, always in sync, always together. The wind began to shift, carrying with it a chill that hadn't been present before, signaling the arrival of something more than just a seasonal change. The falconer could feel the air thicken with anticipation, the trees around him swaying slightly, their leaves whispering secrets to one another in a language he had long come to understand. The hawk, perched on his arm, seemed to sense the shift as well, its feathers ruffling ever so slightly, its sharp eyes scanning the horizon, as though looking for something just beyond the reach of the wind's grasp. The falconer stood still, feeling the weight of the moment settle around him, his boots pressed firmly into the earth, grounding him in a way that nothing else could. He had always been attuned to the subtle rhythms of the land, the way the wind moved through the trees, the way the animals shifted in response to unseen forces. But today, there was something different. It wasn't just the wind, nor the way the hawk watched him with an almost unnatural focus. It was the way the sky above had darkened in the span of mere minutes. The once clear blue now overtaken by a heavy gray that rolled in like a curtain being drawn across the heavens. A storm was coming, and it was coming fast. The falconer could hear the first faint rumblings of thunder in the distance, like the growl of a great beast awakening from a long slumber. The hawk shifted on his arm, its talons digging into the leather of the glove, its wings twitching in anticipation. It was a quiet moment, but it was also one that carried with it a sense of urgency. The falconer had faced storms before, had weathered their fury in the open fields and dense forests alike, but something told him that this one would be different. He turned his gaze toward the sky, watching as the clouds rolled and churned, darkening by the second, the wind picking up and pushing against his cloak, tugging at the fabric like an impatient child. The hawk, still perched on his arm, let out a soft, almost imperceptible chirp, as though it too could feel the growing tension in the air. The falconer tightened his grip on the bird's leather glove, feeling the heat of its body against his skin, the steady beat of its heart matching the pulse in his own chest. For a moment, he simply stood there, listening to the wind and the distant thunder, watching as the storm approached with the inevitability of nightfall. And then, as if in response to some unspoken command, he began to move. He turned and made his way toward the shelter of the small hut, each step deliberate and steady, as though he were walking through the heart of a dream. The hawk remained on his arm, its wings tucked neatly against its body, its sharp eyes never leaving the falconer's face. It was as if the two of them were locked in a quiet understanding, a shared moment of recognition that the storm was not something to be feared, but something to be respected. They had both lived through many storms, after all. They had both learned the rhythm of the earth when the sky cracked open and the wind howled with the fury of 1,000 voices. But this storm was different. It was not simply a change in the weather. It was a sign, a warning, a signal that something larger was on the horizon. As he reached the shelter of the hut, the falconer paused for a moment, glancing over his shoulder at the sky that seemed to ripple with energy, the storm now upon them. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, the sound of each drop hitting the ground like the drumbeat of some ancient, forgotten ritual. The hawk shifted again on his arm, its feathers ruffling in the growing wind, but it remained calm, its eyes fixed on the falconer, as though waiting for him to make the next move. The falconer took a deep breath, the cool, damp air filling his lungs as he stepped inside the hut, the door closing softly behind him. The storm had arrived in full force now, the wind howling against the walls, the rain tapping against the roof in a steady rhythm. He could hear the storm outside, but inside the hut there was a strange sense of calm. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, the warmth of the flames a stark contrast to the cold, wet world outside. The falconer moved to the small workbench. In the corner, where his tools were neatly arranged, his leather gloves and falconry gear resting in their usual places. He set the hawk down on its perch, watching as the bird settled into its spot, its feathers slowly relaxing as the tension in its body eased. The falconer smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth lifting just enough to convey the sense of comfort he found in the simple act of tending to his bird. The storm outside was fierce, but inside there was peace. He moved to the hearth, adding another log to the fire, watching as the flames flickered and danced, casting warm light across the room. As the rain beat against the hut, he couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at the world around him. The storm was wild, unpredictable, but it was also a reminder of the power and beauty of nature, of the force that existed beyond his control. It was a humbling thought, one that brought a deep sense of respect for the land he called home. He turned his attention back to the hawk, watching as it perched silently, its eyes fixed on him with a quiet intensity. There was a bond between them, one forged over years of shared experience, of trust and understanding. The hawk had always been more than just a companion. It was a part of him, a reflection of the wild, untamed spirit that lived within both of them. The storm raged outside, but inside there was stillness, The falconer stood for a moment longer, taking in the quiet of the room, the warmth of the fire, and the steady presence of his hawk. Then, with a final glance at the storm outside, he settled into his chair, letting the soft crackle of the fire fill the space. The world outside may have been a whirlwind, but in this moment, inside the hut, there was nothing but calm. The rain continued to pour outside, its steady drumming against the roof, creating a soothing rhythm that contrasted with the turbulent winds howling through the trees. The falconer sat in his chair, his mind a quiet reflection of the storm that raged outside, a swirling vortex of thought and calm. He had always found a certain peace in storms, a deep, almost primal understanding that they were not to be feared, but to be observed with respect. There was power in nature, and in that power there was a beauty that few could truly appreciate. His hawk, perched nearby, seemed unbothered by the howling winds and the violent lashing of rain against the hut. It was as if the bird too understood that the storm was but a fleeting moment in the larger cycle of life, a temporary disruption in the natural order. The falconer shifted slightly in his seat, his eyes never leaving the bird as it sat silently, its feathers slightly fluffed against the dampness in the air. It was moments like these, in the heart of a storm, that he found himself thinking the most. There was something in the stillness of the room, the warmth of the hearth, the soft crackle of the fire, that allowed his mind to wander, to reach beyond the confines of the hut and stretch into the depths of the world outside. He thought of the years he had spent living in this small, quiet corner of the world, of the many storms he had weathered both literally and figuratively. His life, much like the storms, had been full of turbulence and calm, moments of chaos, followed by periods of tranquility. He had learned to live with both, to find balance in the push and pull of the world around him. The falconer glanced toward the window, the curtains pulled back slightly to reveal the chaotic beauty of the punta. Storm. The trees outside bent in the wind, their branches swaying under the pressure of the gusts. The garden, usually a calm and peaceful place, had transformed into a wild, untamed landscape, the herbs and flowers whipping in the wind, their leaves caught in the air like leaves on a stream. He smiled faintly at the sight. There was something magical about how quickly the world could shift, how the landscape could transform in an instant, as though the earth itself was a living, breathing entity capable of great change with a single breath. The hawk, sensing the change in the air, shifted its position slightly, its sharp eyes glinting in the firelight as it turned its gaze toward the window. It was as though the bird was attuned to the same rhythms of nature that the falconer had come to understand over the years, able to feel the subtle shifts in the atmosphere long before they became visible. The storm outside was more than just a weather event. It was a reflection of the larger forces at work in the world, the unspoken tension that existed in the space between everything. The falconer knew that the storm would eventually pass, as all storms did. But in that moment, as the wind howled and the rain battered the hut, it felt as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, something important, something that would change everything. He rose from his chair and crossed the room, his boots soft against the wooden floor, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the edge of the workbench. He glanced down at the tools laid out before him, each one carefully arranged in its place, each one a reminder of the work that lay ahead. His gaze lingered on the leather gloves, the small vials of oil, the tools of his trade. His hands, calloused from years of use, traced the edges of the items with a kind of reverence. There was comfort in routine, in knowing exactly where everything belonged, in the quiet assurance that the work would continue, no matter what the storm outside had in store. The hawk shifted on its perch, a soft chirp breaking the stillness of the room. The falconer turned toward it, his gaze softening as he regarded the bird. There was a certain bond between them, one that had been built over years of trust and understanding. The bird's gaze met his, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no storm, no wind, no rain, just the two of them. In perfect sync, a shared moment of stillness in the eye of the storm. The falconer nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the connection between them. He moved toward the door of the hut, pausing only to glance back at the bird. The hawk tilted its head, as if giving him its blessing to go out into the storm. With a quiet breath, the falconer opened the door and stepped outside. The world immediately felt different, the air thick with the energy of the storm. The wind whipped around him, tugging at his cloak, but he stood firm, letting the wind pass through him without resistance. The rain fell in sheets, cold and sharp against his skin, but he welcomed it. There was something invigorating about the storm, something that made him feel alive in a way that nothing else could. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the rain wash over him, feeling it soak through his clothes, through the fabric of his very being. It was as though the storm was cleansing him, washing away the layers of dirt and dust that had accumulated over time, both in the world around him and within himself. He stood there for a long while, his face turned up to the sky, the rain running in rivulets down his face, his cloak billowing out behind him in the wind. The world seemed to pause, as if it were waiting for something to happen. And then, with a suddenness that took him by surprise, the storm shifted. The wind changed direction, and the rain slowed to a gentle mist. The tension that had hung in the air seemed to dissipate, and in that moment, the falconer understood. The storm, like all things in life, was a passing moment, a fleeting interruption in the larger rhythm of the world. He opened his eyes, the mist clinging to his lashes, and turned back toward the hut. The hawk was still perched inside, waiting for him. He knew that it was time to return, to resume the rhythm of the day, to continue the work that lay ahead. The storm had passed, but its lessons would remain, etched into his memory like the deep, timeless rhythm of the earth. The falconer stood at the edge of the clearing, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, his eyes gazing out into the forest that stretched endlessly before him. The morning was unusually still, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken things. The usual hum of the forest, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant murmur of the stream was absent. Instead, there was a palpable silence, thick and tangible, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Even the hawk, perched quietly on its post inside the coop, seemed to sense it. The bird was still, its feathers ruffled slightly in the cool morning air, its sharp eyes fixed on something unseen, as if waiting for a signal, a sign, a moment of change. The falconer could feel it too, that strange tension in the air. It was as though the universe was on the cusp of something important, something that would shift the course of the day, the season, or perhaps even his life. He had experienced this feeling before, many times, and each time it had preceded a turning point, a moment when everything around him would change, even if he couldn't yet see how or why. The wind, which had been absent for hours, began to stir again, but this time it was different. It was soft, a mere whisper, but there was a depth to it, a complexity that made the trees sway in ways that seemed unfamiliar. The branches moved, with a grace that suggested they were not reacting to the wind, but rather responding to it, as if they were partners in a dance, each anticipating the other's moves. The falconer took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs and calming his racing thoughts. There was nothing to do but wait. The storm from days ago had passed, leaving behind a sense of renewal, but this stillness, this quiet before the change was different. It was not the calm after the storm. It was the silence before the dawn, the moment before everything fell into place. He turned away from the clearing and walked slowly back toward the hut. As he moved, he passed the herb garden, its flowers now in full bloom, their petals catching the first light of morning. The scent of lavender, thyme, and rosemary filled the air, a gentle reminder of the work he had done in the past to cultivate this small piece of the earth. Each plant, each flower, was a living testament to the slow, patient rhythms of life that he had come to understand over the years. The hawk shifted on its perch as he approached the coop, its head cocked to one side as it watched him with its unblinking gaze. The falconer reached out and gently ran his hand over the bird's feathers, the familiar weight of the bird grounding him in the moment. He could feel the hawk's muscles tense beneath his touch, a quiet reminder of the bird's power and precision. The falconer had come to rely on this quiet connection between them, this bond forged not through words or commands, but through years of shared experiences. It was a connection built on trust and understanding, on the silent acknowledgement that they were in this together, each playing their part in the rhythm of the world. He stepped back from the coop and moved inside the hut, where the warmth of the fire greeted him. The hearth was still glowing softly, the embers a deep red that flickered in the quiet space. The falconer added a few more logs to the fire, watching. As the flames leapt up to greet the new fuel, the crackling sound filled the room, the only noise in the otherwise still space. As he sat down at the workbench, his mind returned to the feeling that had settled over him in the clearing. There was something in the air, something that felt like the cusp of change, but it was not yet clear what that change would be. He turned, his attention to the leather gloves he had been repairing the day before, picking up the needle and thread with practiced hands. He worked slowly, carefully, his thoughts focused on the task at hand. The stitching was methodical, each pass of the needle through the leather, a small act of creation, a reminder that, despite the quiet, the work of the world continued. The hawk was still outside, perched silently in its coop, and the falconer could feel its presence as surely as if it were right beside him. They were partners in this life, each knowing the other's rhythms, each relying on the other for the next moment, the next movement. But even as he worked, he could not shake the feeling that something was on the horizon, something that would change everything. The wind shifted again, this time with more force, stirring the leaves outside and sending a ripple through the garden. The falconer paused, his hand stilling on the leather, and listened. The air felt heavier now, more charged, as though the world was holding its breath once again. He set the gloves aside and stood up, walking over to the window. Outside, the clouds had begun to gather, darkening the sky and casting a shadow over the clearing. The trees swayed in the wind, their branches creaking under the pressure. The falconer could feel the tension in the air, the same feeling that had come before the storm. But this time, it was different. The change was coming. He could feel it deep in his bones, and yet he could not predict what form it would take. As he stood there, watching the sky darken, he felt a sense of anticipation building within him. The calm before the change was always the hardest part, the moment when everything seemed poised on the edge of something new, but still unseen. The hawk's call echoed through the air, sharp and clear, as though signaling the falconer to act, to prepare for whatever was coming. The falconer turned from the window, his mind made up. There was nothing to do but wait, but this time he would be ready. He returned to the workbench, his hands steady and sure as he finished the gloves, his thoughts focused on the task at hand, but his heart and mind ever aware of the change that was coming. The wind howled outside, the storm approaching, but the falconer felt a sense of quiet determination settle over him. Whatever the storm would bring, he would face it head on, with the hawk at his side and the quiet strength of his own rhythm to guide him. The morning mist lingered in the air like a soft veil, covering the earth in a delicate blanket of silence as the falconer moved through the quiet clearing. His steps were slow, measured, each one deliberate as he made his way toward the coop, his boots barely making a sound against the damp soil. The hawk, perched on its familiar perch, remained still and watchful, its sharp eyes scanning the surroundings with the precision only a bird of prey could possess. The falconer paused for a moment, watching the bird, his thoughts quiet and focused, attuned to the subtle rhythms of the morning. There was no rush, no urgency, only the peaceful stillness that had become his world. The trees, tall and ancient, stretched toward the sky, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, while the soft hum of insects filled the air, creating a harmony of life that was as old as the forest itself. As he approached the co-op, the falconer extended his arm slowly, offering the hawk a small piece of meat. The bird responded with a swift movement, its talons curling around the offering as it settled back into its perch, its eyes never leaving the falconer's face. The connection between them was palpable, an unspoken understanding that had grown over years of shared experiences. The falconer smiled faintly, his heart swelling with a quiet pride at the bond they had forged. As the day unfolded, the falconer went about his tasks with the same steady rhythm, each movement deliberate and calm. There was no need for haste. The day would pass as it always did, in its own time, with its own pace. The herbs in the garden were checked, their leaves still damp with dew, and the falconer carefully trimmed the edges of the plants, making sure they remained healthy and strong. The scent of basil, thyme, and rosemary filled the air, a reminder of the seasons that had come and gone, and of the constant cycles that governed the world around him. He moved with the precision of someone who had lived in harmony with nature for years, each gesture purposeful and measured. The hawk remained nearby, watching him with quiet curiosity, its sharp eyes following every movement with the intensity that only a predator could possess. The falconer had long since ceased to think of the hawk as a mere companion. It was a part of him, a reflection of the patience and stillness that defined his life. As the morning passed into afternoon, the falconer felt a sense of contentment wash over him. There was no need for anything more, no longing for something beyond this quiet existence. He was where he belonged, in the company of the forest, the hawk, and the steady rhythm of his daily tasks. The afternoon sun began to sink, lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing. The light softened, turning golden as it filtered through the trees, creating a peaceful ambiance that filled the air with a sense of tranquility. The falconer took a moment to pause, his eyes tracing the patterns of light and shadow that danced across the forest floor. The world felt still, almost suspended in time, as though the very earth was holding its breath. There was no rush, no urgency. Everything was exactly as it should be. The falconer's thoughts wandered, drifting like the leaves caught in the breeze. His mind was clear, uncluttered by distractions or worries. The hawk, sensing the change in the air, shifted its weight on the perch, its wings stretching slightly as it prepared for the evening's flight. The falconer smiled, reaching for the leather glove that rested beside him. The bond between them was silent, but strong, shaped by years of mutual understanding, of trust built through every quiet moment shared. He extended his arm, and the hawk stepped onto the glove, its talons warm and familiar against his skin. Together, they walked toward the open field, the hawk's wings twitching in anticipation of the flight that was to come. The early morning light filtered softly through the canopy, casting dappled shadows across the clearing as the falconer stood quietly by the coop, his breath steady and unhurried. The hawk, perched with its wings neatly tucked in, surveyed the world around it with a calm and unwavering focus, its keen eyes watching every movement in the forest with the precision of a predator. The falconer felt a deep sense of peace settle over him as he watched the bird, the bond between them unspoken but undeniable, forged through years of shared experiences, patient training, and quiet companionship. There was no need for words. The silence between them was enough. With a slow, deliberate motion, the falconer reached for the leather glove resting at his side, his fingers brushing the soft surface of the worn leather before he extended his arm to the hawk. Without hesitation, the bird stepped onto the glove, its talons firm but gentle against his skin, and the two of them, connected by this ancient sacred ritual, moved together into the open space beyond the co-op. The early morning mist still clung to the ground, creating a soft, ethereal layer over the earth, as though the world itself were just waking, stretching beneath the sun's gentle warmth. The forest was still, the sounds of the night creatures fading away as the day began its slow unfurling. The gentle rustle of leaves, the only sound that filled the air. The falconer took a few steps, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. As the hawk shifted its weight on his arm, adjusting to the rhythm of his movement. There was no need for urgency, no rush. They moved together with a quiet grace, their steps synchronized in a way that seemed almost effortless. The falconer's mind, as always, was calm and clear, his thoughts drifting in time with the quiet flow of the morning. His world was simple, composed of the steady rhythm of his tasks, the quiet moments of reflection, and the sacred companionship he shared with the hawk. There were no distractions, no demands, just this quiet connection to the natural world around him. The falconer paused for a moment, allowing the hawk to settle on his arm, its sharp eyes scanning the horizon as though it too sensed the stillness of the morning. The bond between them was palpable, a shared understanding that needed no words, no commands, just a silent trust in each other. The hawk tilted its head slightly, its feathers shifting in the soft breeze that swept through the clearing, and the falconer smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, as if to say, "We are here." With a soft, steady breath, the falconer continued forward, his steps deliberate and measured, as though moving through time itself, in perfect harmony with the world around him. The hawk remained perched on his arm, its wings occasionally fluttering in preparation, but it was not yet time for flight. The falconer had learned long ago that every moment held its own rhythm, its own pulse, and that patience was as much a part of their connection as action. They were not in a hurry. The world, as it always had, would unfold in its own time, and they would be there to witness it together. As they walked through the clearing, the falconer's gaze drifted upward, taking in the tall trees that surrounded them, their trunks stretching high into the sky, their branches reaching out like arms that embraced the morning light. The leaves, still wet with dew, shimmered in the soft glow of the sun, creating a tapestry of green and gold that seemed to breathe with life. The forest, always quiet but never still, held its secrets in its depths, and the falconer knew, as he always did, that it was a place of refuge, a sanctuary where time moved at its own pace, without the demands of the outside world. The hawk, sensing the falconer's stillness, lifted its head slightly, its sharp eyes following the path ahead, its body tensing in preparation. The falconer's gaze followed the bird's, and he understood that the time had come. With a soft exhale, he slowly raised his arm, the hawk responding instantly, its wings stretching wide, and with a powerful beat, it launched into the air, soaring upward with a grace that was both beautiful and commanding. The falconer watched as the bird ascended, its wings cutting through the air with effortless strength, each beat carrying it higher into the sky. The world seemed to stand still as he followed its flight, his gaze tracking the bird's every movement as it circled above, becoming a small speck against the backdrop of the wide open sky. There was no need for words, no need for direction. The hawk knew its role, its place in the world, as did the falconer. It was a dance, one that had been practiced over countless hours, one that existed in perfect harmony with the world around them. The hawk soared higher, then with a sudden shift in direction, it dove, its sharp eyes locked on its target. The falconer remained still, his body relaxed but alert, his connection to the bird unwavering. He could feel the wind on his face, the soft whisper of the breeze, carrying the scent of the earth and the trees, and he allowed himself to be swept up in the rhythm of it all. The hawk's wings beat with increasing speed as it closed the distance, its focus sharp, its mind locked on the task at hand. And in that moment, as the bird swooped down, its talons extending, the falconer knew that everything was as it should be. They were a part of the world, as much a part of the forest as the trees themselves, bound together by this shared rhythm, this quiet bond that needed no words. As the hawk landed gracefully on the ground, the falconer took a step forward, his heart full of the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing the world, in all its beauty and simplicity, was exactly as it should be. Together, they had danced in the silence of the morning, each movement a testament to the trust they had built, the connection that had grown between them over time. And as the hawk settled back onto his arm, the falconer knew that this was only the beginning, that there would be many more moments like this one, quiet, peaceful, and full of the simple beauty that came from living in harmony with the world around him. As the day began to shift, the falconer stood at the edge of the clearing, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the first hints of light began to streak across the dark sky, casting a soft, silvery glow over the treetops. The air was cool, the earth still damp with the night's dew, and the sounds of the forest were quiet, as though it too was holding its breath in anticipation of the coming dawn. The hawk, perched on the falconer's arm, shifted its weight slightly, its sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, alert to the slightest movement in the underbrush, its feathers ruffling slightly in the early morning breeze. There was something sacred in the stillness of this moment, a connection between the man and the bird that needed no words to be understood. It was as though the world, in all its complexity and chaos, had faded away, leaving only this simple, quiet ritual between them two creatures, bound by trust, each attuned to the rhythm of the other. The falconer's breath came steady and calm, his heart beating in time with the soft rustle of the trees around him, the distant calls of birds breaking the silence like faint echoes from another world. There was no hurry, no rush to this moment. Time seemed to stretch and bend, existing only as a quiet, unspoken presence between him and the hawk. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, his senses heightened, every sound and sensation magnified in the stillness of the early morning hours. The world was just beginning to wake, and with it, the falconer felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The hawk, sensing its master's stillness, settled more comfortably on his arm, its sharp talons pressing gently against the soft leather of the glove. And the falconer smiled faintly, his hand resting lightly on the bird's chest as though to reassure it that they were both in this together, just as they always had been. The first rays of sunlight finally pierced the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing and illuminating the world in a soft, golden light. The falconer took a slow step forward, his boots crunching softly on the ground, and the hawk followed his movement, its wings fluttering slightly as it adjusted to the rhythm of his steps. They moved together, a single unit, each step an unspoken command and response. The forest around them came alive with the soft whispers of the wind, and the rustle of leaves, the world waking from its long slumber. The falconer paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the world around him. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor, and the air smelled fresh and clean, filled with the earthy scent of moss and wet soil. He could hear the distant sound of a stream trickling over rocks, the faint calls of birds as they began to stir, and the soft murmur of wind through the branches above. Everything felt in balance, as though the world, in all its quiet complexity, had come together in this moment. The hawk, sensing the shift in its surroundings, stood tall on the falconer's arm, its wings slightly spread as it prepared for the flight ahead. The falconer's hand tightened around the leather glove, and he could feel the bird's muscles tense beneath his touch, its sharp eyes locked on the horizon. There was no need for words, no need for commands. The bird knew what was coming, and the falconer, too, knew what was expected. With a soft exhale, the falconer raised his arm, and in an instant the hawk took flight, its wings cutting through the air with powerful strokes, its body a blur of motion against the brightening sky. The falconer watched, his eyes tracking the bird's every movement as it soared higher, its wings gliding effortlessly through the air. It was a dance, one that had been practiced countless times, and yet each time was as fresh and thrilling as the first. The hawk banked sharply, its wings catching the rising wind as it circled above the clearing, its sharp eyes scanning the earth below for any sign of movement. The falconer remained still, his gaze fixed on the bird, and for a moment it felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them, bird and man, united in a silent bond that transcended everything else. The hawk's flight was smooth and graceful, its every movement a reflection of the trust and understanding that had been cultivated between it and the falconer over countless hours of training and companionship. It was more than just a bird. It was a partner, a companion, a living testament to the patience and care that had shaped their relationship. As the bird climbed higher into the sky, the falconer felt a sense of pride swell within him. He had raised this bird, taught it, and, in turn, it had taught him the true meaning of trust and partnership. The hawk, its flight effortless and controlled, circled once more before diving downward in a graceful arc, its wings folding as it descended toward its target. The falconer, his heart beating in time with the bird's movements, watched in silence. As the hawk reached the ground with a soft thud, its talons sinking into the earth as it landed, its body still for just a moment, before it shook out its wings and turned its head to look back at the falconer. The bond between them was unspoken, yet it was felt deeply, a connection forged in silence and shared experiences. The falconer's lips curled into a faint smile, his chest swelling with a quiet sense of satisfaction as he walked toward bird, his movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring the moment. The hawk, still perched on the ground, raised its head slightly, its sharp eyes watching the falconer's every movement. The two of them stood there for a moment, the world around them still and quiet, the air thick with the weight of the connection. They shared, and then, with a soft exhale, the falconer reached out his arm once more, extending the glove toward the bird. Without hesitation, the hawk stepped onto the glove, its talons digging gently into the leather as it settled onto his arm, its feathers brushing against his skin. The falconer smiled once more, a quiet, knowing smile, and turned to walk back toward the clearing, the bird resting comfortably on his arm. Together, they moved through the world as one bird and man, companion and teacher, united in a bond that no words could capture. The world around them continued to stir, the sun, now fully risen, and the forest alive with the sounds of morning. The hawk, now resting once more on the falconer's arm, surveyed the world around it with quiet satisfaction, its sharp eyes catching every movement in the brush, every rustle of leaves, every flicker of light. The falconer, his heart light, and his mind clear, continued forward, his footsteps steady and unhurried, knowing that this moment, this quiet, sacred moment, was all that was needed. The first rays of light pierced the darkened sky, painting the horizon in shades of pale orange and soft pink. As the falconer stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes fixed on the landscape before him, the morning air was cool, crisp, and filled with the earthy scent of dew-drenched grass and moss. The silence of the early morning was broken only by the faint sounds of nature stirring around him, the soft rustle of leaves in the trees, the occasional chirp of a bird, and the distant murmur of a stream flowing through the forest. He breathed deeply, taking in the peace of the world around him, feeling the weight of the quiet embrace him like an old friend. His hands rested lightly on the handle of the hawk's perch, the bird's sharp talons lightly scraping against the wood as it shifted its weight in preparation for the day ahead. The falconer glanced at the hawk, meeting its gaze, and for a moment, everything else in the world seemed to fall away. There was nothing but the two of them, standing in the stillness of the morning, connected by a bond that needed no words. The hawk blinked slowly, its sharp eyes flicking toward the sky, and the falconer smiled faintly. It was as if the bird, too, understood the sacredness of this moment, the unspoken understanding between them that went beyond training and command. It was a bond that had been formed over years of shared experience, of long, patient hours spent together in the quiet rhythm of their lives. The hawk's feathers ruffled gently in the wind, its wings folding slightly as it adjusted its stance, and the falconer knew that the time had come for another day's flight. With a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped forward, extending his arm toward the bird. The hawk, sensing the shift in its master's movements, stepped gracefully onto the falconer's arm, its talons sinking gently into the leather of the glove. The bird's feathers brushed against the falconer's skin, and he felt a quiet thrill of anticipation, knowing that this moment was only the beginning of a new day. The world around them began to wake, the sounds of the forest growing louder, as more birds called out and the sun climbed higher into the sky, casting longer shadows across the ground. The falconer turned toward the open expanse of the clearing, his gaze moving across the landscape, taking in the familiar beauty of the woods and the meadow beyond. The hawk stood tall on his arm, its sharp eyes scanning the ground for any sign of movement, every muscle in its body tensed and ready for action. It was in moments like these that the falconer felt truly alive, when he was in sync with the world around him, when everything seemed to come together in a harmonious rhythm. There was no place else he needed to be, no other task that needed his attention. For now, it was just him and the hawk, the quiet hum of the world around them, and the shared understanding that they were part of something much larger than themselves. With a quiet hum, the falconer gave the signal, and the hawk launched from his arm, its wings beating powerfully as it soared into the sky. The bird's flight was a beautiful sight, graceful, effortless, as though it was born to fly. The falconer watched, his eyes tracking the bird's every movement as it ascended higher, its wings cutting through the air with a precision that came only from years of practice. He felt a thrill in his chest as he watched the hawk circle above him, its sharp eyes scanning the earth below for any sign of prey. The bird was focused, its body aligned with the wind, each beat of its wings a perfect rhythm in the dance between bird and air. It was a sight that never grew old, a reminder of the incredible bond they shared, of the trust and understanding that had been built over countless flights. The falconer remained still, his gaze fixed on the hawk, feeling the connection between them as though it were a thread that tied them together across space and time. The bird dove suddenly, cutting through the air with incredible speed, its wings folding tightly as it descended toward the ground. The falconer's heart skipped a beat as he watched, knowing that the bird was about to make its landing. The hawk's talons extended, its body angled just so, and it landed with a soft thud, its feet sinking into the earth as it crouched, its wings folding neatly behind it. The falconer exhaled slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. It was a perfect landing, a sign of the bond they shared, of the hours spent in training, and the trust that had been cultivated over time. The hawk stood still for a moment, its sharp eyes scanning the area around it, and the falconer approached slowly, his movements calm and measured. He reached out a hand, and the bird hopped gracefully onto his arm, its talons sinking into the glove as it settled in place. The falconer walked back toward the center of the clearing, his steps slow and deliberate, as though savoring the moment. The hawk, perched confidently on his arm, watched the world around them with calm interest, its wings folded neatly against its body, its sharp eyes alert to every movement. For a long moment, the falconer and the hawk stood there together, watching the world unfold before them, the sounds of the forest growing louder as the day continued to progress. It was a peaceful moment, one of quiet connection where nothing needed to be said because everything was understood. The falconer's breath came steady and calm, his heart in sync with the rhythm of the world around him. He glanced at the sky, the sun now fully risen, casting warm golden light across the clearing. It was a new day, full of possibilities, and the falconer knew that whatever came next, he and the hawk would face it together, side by side. The air had grown noticeably cooler as the day continued to unfold, and the falconer felt a slight chill brush against his skin as he walked toward the clearing, the hawk still perched on his arm, its talons gripping the glove with a comfortable familiarity. The rhythm of their movements was steady, unhurried, and as they approached the wide expanse of the field at the edge of the forest, the falconer could sense the change in the atmosphere. There was something different in the air, something both subtle and powerful, and it was the kind of change that could only mean one thing: the time had come for the first flight of the day. The falconer stopped, his feet brushing lightly over the soft earth, and he glanced toward the horizon, where the sun had risen higher, casting its golden light across the field and turning the grasses into a sea of gentle waves. He could feel the hawk's focus sharpen, its keen eyes scanning the surroundings, and he knew that the bird was ready, just as he was. Slowly, he removed his arm from the bird's perch, extending it outward with a steady motion that signaled the beginning of the flight. The hawk, sensing the moment, shifted its weight slightly, its feathers rustling as it adjusted, its sharp eyes now fixed on the distant horizon. With a quiet, fluid movement, the falconer gave the signal, and the hawk sprang from his arm, its wings unfurling in a burst of powerful motion that sent a rush of wind through the surrounding trees. The bird took flight effortlessly, its body cutting through the air with precision and grace, soaring higher into the sky as it began to circle above the clearing. The falconer stood rooted to the earth, his gaze fixed on the bird as it rose. Higher, the hawk's wings beating rhythmically against the wind. There was a moment of silence, a shared stillness between man and bird, as the falconer allowed the hawk to gain height, to find its own rhythm in the vast expanse of sky. The bird's wings moved with fluid precision, its body adjusting with every shift in the wind, and the falconer marveled at the way the bird seemed to become one with the air itself, its every motion a testament to the bond that had formed between them. It wasn't just training or instinct that guided the bird. It was something deeper, something that existed between them in the unspoken space of trust and understanding. As the hawk continued its flight, the falconer's thoughts wandered, remembering the countless hours spent training the bird, teaching it to navigate the currents of the wind, to read the subtle shifts in the air. It had been a long and patient journey, one that had taken time to build, and he had seen the hawk's growth in every flight, in every successful return to his glove. The bird had become more than just a companion. It had become a part of him, a living extension of the bond they shared. The hawk's flight had become a ritual, a sacred moment that belonged only to them, and the falconer knew that each flight was an affirmation of that connection. The hawk's wings beat steadily, and the falconer felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he watched the bird climb higher, its form a sharp silhouette against the sky. There was no rush, no hurry in the flight, just the steady, measured rhythm of the bird as it circled above, each beat of its wings carrying it further into the boundless sky. For a moment, the falconer allowed himself to forget everything but the bird, the sky, and the world around him. There was a peacefulness in this silence, a peace that came from knowing that they were in this together, that each flight was a testament to their shared journey. He took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs, and as he exhaled, he felt the weight of the day's work settle into place. The first flight was always the most meaningful, the one that reminded him of the bond they had forged, and the quiet joy of knowing that the hawk was not just a trained animal, but a companion, a partner in every sense of the word. He glanced back at the hawk, still soaring high above, and his heart swelled with pride. The bird was returning, its wings gliding effortlessly as it adjusted its course, and as it descended toward him, the falconer extended his arm once more, ready to receive the bird back into his care. The hawk landed softly on his glove, its talons gripping the leather with familiar ease, and for a moment the falconer simply stood there, his hand steady as the bird settled into place. The hawk's chest rose and fell with each steady breath. Its sharp eyes focused on him, and he smiled softly, silently acknowledging the silent communication that passed between them. This was the essence of their bond, the shared rhythm of flight, the unspoken understanding that existed between them. The bird had flown with purpose, with grace, and now it had returned, its task complete. The falconer adjusted his glove, gently patting the hawk's feathers as he whispered a soft word of praise, a simple gesture of appreciation for the bird's skill and trust. With a final flick of its wings, the hawk settled fully into place, its talons finding their hold on the glove, and the falconer walked slowly toward the clearing, the bird now calm and content on his arm. The first flight of the day had come to a close, but there was no sense of finality in it, no sense of rushing to the next task. It was simply another moment in their shared journey, another quiet affirmation of the trust and bond that had grown between them over time. As they walked together, the falconer couldn't help but feel the quiet joy that came from knowing that the hawk would always return to him, always trust him, always be there, ready for the next flight, the next challenge, the next moment of shared purpose. There was no need for words, no need for anything more than this. Just the quiet understanding between man and bird, soaring together, forever bound by the rhythm of the sky.